22nd, 2019. We have several presentations this evening and staff reports. We're going to begin this evening with Fort Osage Tiny Homes for Veterans Project. Mr. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we do have one correction. I've been informed that this is Van Horn High School.
I was going to say there's a lot of Van Horn students here tonight.
Right.
So
we'll get that corrected. But
okay.
Nevertheless, we have Adam Surrey from Van Horn High School and several of his students here tonight to speak to the council about an exciting project that they have underway. So I will ask Adam to come forward and kick us off this evening.
Okay, right here.
Good evening. I'm here with a number of my students and colleagues representing Van Horn High School. We have been hard at work on a project for several months now, and this is kind of the culmination of that project. So you're going to see a short video that contains some student testimonials, and then 4 of our students will present a slideshow that they've created for you. They'll kind of get into what they're asking for from the council
very good.
when they're ready to. So.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you're here with
Van Horn.
right here.
Okay.
So these are all right. Thank you.
After having multiple family issues, me and my mother, who is currently unemployed, were left alone in a house which we could not pay for, causing us to move in with my grandmother. We lived in an unhealthy environment, the basement. At one point in time, more than half of my clothes got ruined due to intense rainstorms, leaving me with minimal clothing for freshman year. As an escape from a basement with next to no rainproof installments, me and my mother concurred that we would move to Kansas City Trailer Park with my mom's mom. She paid for everything. I had to wake up at 5 a.m. sharp in the morning, along with being capable of little to no sleep due to stress, just to get to school on time. This struggle continued to haunt me all throughout my extracurricular activity, band. It was hard getting to practices that, if I was late, I would receive punishment for. And performances, this constant struggle continued all throughout my high school years until early senior year.
I was dealing with a lot of depression, anxiety, because of the situation I was going through with my dad. And it was very hard to deal with. And there was nights where I couldn't sleep. And I would go to school every day sleeping because I was too tired. And my depression used to get worse and worse. It's just affecting school because I can't concentrate enough because I'm too tired.
Since I was really little, my family struggled with providing for everyone, considering we've always had babies in the house, and we've only ever had 2 parent incomes, which sometimes were really low and sometimes were more inconsistent, and it wasn't a very healthy environment. We lived off of food stamps for a long time. A lot of the times we had to decide between shutting the lights off or turning off the water, which no kid should have to worry about much less whether they should have a birthday cake that year or not. This struggle went on for a really long time, and personally I enjoy being a little more well-rounded and involved in a lot of activities like band and choir, theater. And all throughout middle school this was difficult because of a lack of resources, such as the car would be repossessed or my parents would have to work overtime, and it was never an easy thing. And when we were evicted when I was really little, it made getting to school difficult. It made staying in school difficult. I couldn't spend time with my friends. I felt like I was living an abnormal life for just a little kid. I feel like a shelter for people in situations like mine would have been so beneficial in terms of knowing for a fact that they would have a place to sleep, that they would have food to eat, water to drink. Because again, no kid should ever have to worry about that.
From about the age of 1, my father was in prison. My mother was a single parent living in Florida. We struggled, trying to make sure we had a place to stay or food to eat, but I always knew my mother always put me first, knowing that she cared, would make sure I was in a safe place. But after 10 years of living in Florida, we moved to Independence and lived here and struggled of making sure we would have enough money to pay the light bill or the water bill But every day I knew that my mom tried to make sure we had a stable home for me and my little sister, but I knew that these situations would eventually affect my school life, knowing that, I might not pass freshman or sophomore year, but to this day I know that my mom still tries, but my grandmother, the person that has brought me in and has helped me through most of my life, has put a big part in my future and a big part of everything for me. I know that being in a different household may have affected a lot of things, but I know I've got my family to thank me for that.
For a very long time, my mother, who I lived with for a while, would be bouncing from house to house because she was a single parent living off of only the paycheck she could get and also my father's child support. We lost many houses. We only stayed in places for a little over a year before changing. Raytown, Lee Summit, Independence, Kansas City, wherever would take us. If these alternative living places were built, it would be so much better for kids in my situation. And without my biological father, I believe I'd still be currently living at one of my mom's friend's houses or a friend's house. It affected my extracurriculars like band, choir, debate, by just not being able to show up or showing up later, too early, staying after school for hours because I knew my mother had to work or couldn't pick me up from Raytown. I feel like the things we offer here today and the things that will be said today will be very beneficial and I hope can change a lot for kids.
Good evening. We're a Van Horn representative group for the project-based learning group who has created this idea of building an alternative living space for students without resources at our school. I'm Isabel Munoz.
I'm Chase Carquillo.
I'm Alex Edson.
I'm Alicia Crane.
We've definitely demonstrated a need for a temporary living space like the one we're proposing. As of 2017, a point-in-time count confirmed at least 1,671 people living without resources in Jackson and Wyandotte counties, and at least 371 of these people were children. In these two counties, we've also seen a serious lack of alternative housing options without requirements for their residents in terms of demographics or the length of their stay. According to the head of board of Salvation Army, around 15 to 20 families are turned away each month. Let's turn to our students. Last year, the Independent School District found that 938 students were qualified for services offered to students with low income. About a third of our students' families made less than $25,000 in the 2017-2018 school year, and 71% of us qualified for free or reduced lunches. At Van Horn alone, 46 students and 25 families were reported with being without a home. This is a problem not only in our county, but in our schools. And this not only affects our students on an obvious level, but in school. As stated by several students in our video, being displaced makes it difficult to be involved in extracurricular activities, which is a huge way of contributing to the Van Horn community. These students are also 2 to 3 times more likely to be chronically absent from school to no fault of their own. Our students at Van Horn are well-rounded, committed, and hard-working people, but this serves much less of a benefit to them as students when they're unsure of where they can sleep or whether they can eat some nights. On the screen are 46 dots. These dots represent every life that we're even aware of being affected by poverty at our school. The dots are bigger than the statistics they make up, and just as they are in real life. These dots are babies facing struggles adults shouldn't even have to face. We ask you to see them for who they are rather than what they are.
All resources provided were done by 237 students along with 12 teachers across 8 classes: geometry, social studies, architectural engineering, interior design, science, culinary, STEM, and English. These classes all had a part to play in designing and getting us here today, along with some students in Crispin involved in the science part of the project. So, not only have we gone cross-curriculum, but also cross-building. We understood that early on that the concern for property value, so we changed the tiny home idea to a duplex idea, each being 670 foot squared per unit, 8 to 9 feet tall with a loft included. MCC Community College, along with NARI, have been very anxious to lend us help, supplies, and funding for the project. 6 buildings, 12 units each, fitting 6 people. A unit along with a food pantry, donation bin, and a community garden seen here. This is what it would look like from the outside and what we hope to get approved today.
Our plan. In our housing units, we have 6 to 7 houses. The 7th is an on-site manager's office and then a large supply shed for storage of things like lawn equipment, like shovels, mowers, garden equipment, things like that. In the office, we are looking to have a teacher from Van Horn High School who is fresh out of college, and we will ask them if they will want to live there. If necessary, the office and supply shed could be changed back into a living space. We have also talked to partner with MCC Blue River Community College. They have a class where they build things like wind turbines and solar panels. After the build is finished, they disassemble them. What we want is for them to come down and build them there and leave them there. Basic necessities like food and water and electrical will be provided as well. The culinary group have designed a massive food pantry and community garden. Those in the community will help run the garden in order. The houses will be made as earthquake-proof as possible, and Van Horn High School will be used as a storm shelter if needed. Food and clothing drives are planned, and clothes donation bins will be set up around the area. And for all these outcomes to happen, all we need is the approval from you.
What we need is your approval to have the project be put to plan. We have the necessary resources, teachers, and students dedicated to making a safe place for the families that need one. We need your help to provide homes for the people, students, who need them. You hear so much about the kids in the community who don't have homes, but you don't think of them as the kids they are, but rather the statistic they make up. Imagine one of these kids as your own.
Okay, great questions. Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic presentation. Wonderful project that you've brought before us. Terrific T-shirts. Tell me a little bit. I want to ask. Your T-shirts say "Lots of love." Your project is called Lots of Love. So would one of you like to, I mean, I think I kind of get it, lots of love, but maybe tell us a little bit about your branding and design and messaging on that, and does it include more than just the housing program that you're coming forward with tonight? And where can we get T-shirts?
I'm not sure about the T-shirt idea.
Oh, okay.
We'll have to ask Mr. Oatman.
Okay.
The person to come up with the design was our teacher.
When did you come up? Would you mind just coming up to the
Yes.
microphone so people at home can hear you?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay.
The Lots of Love idea was actually from one of the leading teachers in this, Mr. Oatman. Do you mind coming up here and explaining it to me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Idea basically was born when I first started teaching here. I would drive down the highway going on the route home, and I'd hit 435, and all of a sudden I'd see people out on the roadway panhandling. Once in a while I'd reach into my wallet and give them some change, and one day it dawned on me, am I helping them out or am I enabling them to the point where they are using that as a crutch to not get off the street? So I started doing a lot of thoughts about it and talked to one of our partners, Nari, and started thinking every city has all of these lots that are just abandoned. They're grown over with weeds and everything, and what would happen if schools not only at Van Horn but across the nation suddenly got involved and they were allowed through the grace of the city councils to build on them, whether it be tiny homes to get people a place to live, or whether it be just building a playground set. Kids would then barter with the city for their opportunity to use that piece of land. That's why it says lots of love, lots referring to the plot of land. In this case, it's Van Horn. There's a heart drawn around it because it's something these kids are passionate about, that Falcon can turn to something else. The heartbeat that's coming out of it, when the business model is used and you do your research and design, those heartbeats go up and down because sometimes you're at a high point, an idea doesn't work, well, you recreate it, you think of something new, you jump back up to a high point. And as things go along, you're going to have those highs and lows, those iterations where things change. Whether you're successful with building the house or building the playground, when it's all over, it doesn't stop. That heartbeat continues out the other side, and you continue on with a new design. And that's basically what the design means.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you are here on a perfect evening. As I look out into the audience tonight, I see a lot of people who are active in this community, either on a personal level or in a professional role, who get what you're trying to do and can be enormous help in continuing this discussion to help make your dream a reality. So thank you for being here tonight. What we heard last week at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon, which was hosted at the Newcastle Elementary School, and Dr. Hurl, your superintendent, was one of the speakers, is Independent School District got a 97 on the APR. 2 of the points they missed were because of attendance. So when you talk about the impact that this has on attendance, even if you didn't care about anything else, the personal stories, it is a big problem in our district, and some of the things that you've talked about this evening are a contributing factor to that. And getting that score as high as we possibly can as a community helps us in a ton of ways with economic development and income growth and all the things that are important. So, anybody who's listening tonight, if you care about nothing else, that is something that can really make a big impact if we can improve attendance in our district. I'm going to open it up to the council for comments or questions, but I want to say, thank you for coming to us, giving us the opportunity to look into this in a little more depth about how we can help with this project. And as I said, you've got a room full of people here tonight that I think will be very interested in engaging in those conversations with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Yes, Councilman.
Yes, I've been working on something similar for about a year now, and we're just about ready to take off. But I do have a lady's card here that will help you along if you'd like to. One of you like to call her. She's been doing that in California. Very, very good about getting the money out there and getting some funds rolling. And so, like I said, I've been working on it about a year, but it's a tough one. Mm-hmm. But she might be able to give you some help.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for the students this evening? Yes, Councilman.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you also for coming tonight and for the the creative ideas and the creative way of trying to meet the needs of students that are homeless or close to being homeless right now. And it's a huge need, not just in our community, but I know there's a lot of communities across the United States that are having the same issues and problems. So your caring, your creative thinking and ideas can really make a difference in the lives of people and for their future. So thank you. Thank you very much. I hope we can do something to help.
Councilman?
Thanks again, but where you've gone in this idea and having worked with Councilman Huff on this, now you got the grunt work. That's the tough load. The idea is fine, you got the perception and everything, but this is where we can help. We could give you land and you still wouldn't have anything. We've been through this so many times, but come to us, we'll be here for you.
Okay. So we will take some time, Mr. City Manager, to investigate this further and see how, what we can continue to develop this idea and see if we can be of assistance in helping with this project.
Certainly, and I would say, Madam Mayor, when the council had their annual strategic planning session last fall, housing was one of the big 5 goals that was identified, and I think this is certainly a critical element of an overall puzzle that we're trying to piece together.
Okay, very good.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
If I can.
Yes.
Thank you for your creativity here. Since the city has taken a position to where we're going to become more aggressive and have become more aggressive with getting rid of some of our dilapidated homes, the issue of backfill. What do we do with those lots if the neighbors to the right or left don't want to pick those up? Given the size of what you're proposing here, it may be a good resource that we can reach out to our friends in the county who, in the land trust, who would have some of the continuous lot sizes that might fit in here a little bit better. But we can definitely just kick those ideas and stuff around, for sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here tonight. Appreciate it. Okay, our next presentation is Public Works procurement process. Mr. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, as we continue to try to implement the most efficient and cost-effective manners for addressing our infrastructure needs, Public Works Department has really come up with an innovative approach to project management that has achieved both of those goals that I stated. In fact, we were recognized recently by the Design Build Institute of America for our approach to our annual intersection repair program. So Tim Gramling, our Director of Public Works, along with Brian Johning from the Design Building Institute of America, have been out on a road show presenting this concept. They're going to play before the home crowd here tonight and share with you some of the successes of that and how we plan to incorporate these into our future construction management projects. So Tim, I will yield to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. As Zach said, I'm here to talk about Public Works procurement processes. This is actually kind of a follow-up to a presentation that I did a couple of years ago, actually in June, at a June study session to you all. At that time, I kind of introduced the concept of design build contracts and construction manager at risk contracts, if you remember. And at that time, I also talked about some projects that we actually had planned to kind of use those processes. And now we've successfully completed those. At the time, I had actually titled the presentation Alternative Project Management. We don't use the term alternative anymore. That kind of has a connotation to it that it's something, kind of an exception to the norm. Now we look at these as integrated project management because it's actually part of our norm to use these, kind of like more tools in our toolbox to deliver projects. And this allows us to deliver projects that drive innovation, cost control, efficiency, and time savings. The idea behind it, by having integrated project delivery methods in addition to some of the ones we've had in the past, is so you can choose a method that best fit the project and the situations. It's not a one-size-fits-all and it's not that one's better than the other. It's you want to use the right one under the right circumstances. So if you remember, I think I had this similar graphic a couple of years ago. These are the three primary design or project delivery methods that we use. You can see the design, bid, build. That is the more traditional method. That's the one everybody's familiar with. The design and construction in that method are not integrated, however. They're actually done in separate processes. You hire an engineer or the design is done separately. You complete that design, you develop all the specifications, the contract documents. You take all of that and you bid it out, and then when it's bid out, then contractors bid on those projects. You select a contractor that's the lowest and most qualified to do the job. By doing that, when you're developing specifications and putting these notes and ideas and plans, you're trying to describe everything down to the nth degree as far as detail goes. With that, you introduce a lot of risk, because if you don't have a specification or something that's covered in the plans or the documents that you put out for bid, and something happens in the project that comes up that you didn't have in those documents, then you've got to deal with that. Usually results in some kind of a change order, which also typically also has a higher cost and some kind of effect on the timeline of the project. So that's where the risk comes from in that delivery method. And also this method, because you're doing the design first and then you're doing the construction later, it's a longer schedule. Under the design build and the construction manager at risk, these are more integrated. And under the design build, you have a lot of innovation because you're doing the design and construction at the same time. You're basically hiring one team, the engineer and architect that's doing the design at the same time that you're hiring the contractor that's going to actually do the construction. They're collaborating during the process. They're also, one of the things that we've actually learned through this process as a staff, we don't actually get into the specific specifications of a project like we do under a design bid build. We have to be more descriptive without being too prescriptive. By being descriptive, we're describing exactly what we want to end up with. We want to describe the quality, how we want it to perform, whatever the project is, instead of giving the prescriptions. By doing that, you're causing the design build team to come up with those specifications to meet what it is you're trying to achieve. And by doing that, we're transferring the risk over to that design build team. This is also, design build also is the method that gives us the fastest schedule in order to complete a project, the quickest from beginning to end. Construction manager at risk is similar design build in that it is integrated, but you still do hire, or you work with a design team and you hire a construction manager separately, but you bring that construction manager on early in the project to get that collaboration. And you do transfer some of the risk similar to what you do in the design build. And you also, under construction manager at risk, it is a reduced time frame compared to design bid build, but it's probably not quite as quick as design build. Under design bid build, that method is actually already accounted for in our procurement policy. That's been described, and that's the method that we followed basically forever. And it's not possible really in that scenario to have a contractor involved in the design, because you don't know who the contractor is going to be that's going to actually build the project until after it's bid out. At that point, the design's complete. Under design build, you're dealing with one contract. You're hiring a team of people, engineers and contractors, and that selection is based on qualifications. And it's more of a performance-based approach to a project. And using that, it drives more cost control through a guaranteed maximum price. There is still a bidding that happens, but it happens with the design build team and hiring their subs to do the project. And under construction manager at risk, we're selecting an architect and engineer to do the design, and then we're also selecting a construction manager, both of those based on qualifications. We're bringing the construction manager on early in the project. Again, you get the cost control through the guaranteed maximum price, similar to what you do with the design build. So it kind of brings us to what we're talking about tonight, and why we're talking about tonight. For design bid, or design build, and for construction manager at risk contracts, there was recently, within the last couple of years, legislation that was approved on the state level that statutory cities are required to follow, and it's very prescriptive on how they go about design, build, and construction manager at risk. They have to follow each of those steps specifically. But there's also in that statute language a provision that says a charter city, such as Independence, can establish its own procedure or own processes. So because of that, we are going to propose some language that's going to go into an update for your procurement policy. I believe it's going to come before the Audit and Finance Committee for review and then eventually to the full council. It's going to includes this language that we want to follow to be able to use these processes in the projects that we're doing. So with that, I'm going to have Brian. This is Brian Johning. He right now is the Vice President of Business Development with Superior Bowen. He also used to work for Schaefer Klein Warren, which is now McClure Engineering. He's worked for both of those companies. Both of those companies were involved in the 3 projects that we talked about doing then and that we've completed since then. Also, part of his unique perspective that he has on this is that he also was the past president of the Design Build Institute of America, Mid-America region, and was very involved in the legislation that I just talked about. And he's here to talk a little bit about the projects that we did and kind of the perspective from the business world. Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, members of the council and mayor, for allowing me to be here today. It was great to hear from those young folks talk about giving you some perspective on life about what's really important, and to see them innovating in that way prior to talking about this is really exciting. So what Tim asked me to maybe visit a little bit about were some of the benefits of design build and why it's important for the City of Independence. I could talk about that probably for an hour given some of my background, but I did want to highlight a couple projects that you all have completed and also talk a little bit about the community at large. The Design Build Institute Mid-America region is comprised of Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska. And in 2018, the City of Independence was recognized for the project of the year in that 4-state region for the innovation associated with the intersection improvements that were contracted in June of 2017 and opened. Actually, several of them were completed prior to the tax renewal vote in August. But then all of them were completed by October of 2017. So you're talking about, over $1 million worth of work that was completed in 6 months. Using traditional and conventional methods, that could have taken 1.5 years to 2 years. The next project that was completed last year is one that we're all very familiar with, I think, in the room. It's achieved a tremendous amount of success and recognition across the state and across the region, probably beyond even the 4-state region of DBIA. This contract was executed in February of 2018 and took what was otherwise a vacant parking lot, backed by some, the backside of the square buildings, and converted it into what has now become a recognized project by the Kansas City Business Journal as a Capstone Award winner in 2019. So those were the 2 bigger design build projects that I would say achieved the most notoriety recently. And the last project I wanted to touch on briefly was the Communication Center, which was done by Construction Manager at Risk. Again, executed the contract in October of 2017 and cut the ribbon in June of 2018. So you're talking about some really short string projects that have changed the landscape here. And over the course of the last 12 months, I just want to take a second to really brag on Tim and his staff. We have presented at a National Public Works Convention about these intersection improvements. We've presented at the Missouri Association of Public Purchasers Conference about the legislation that was passed in 2016. Because of some different earmarks and different interests that exist in Jeff City, which I'm sure you can all appreciate, there was quite a bit of prescription involved in that legislation. DBIA's viewpoints on this were to try to make it as permissive as possible, because let local communities govern how they work best. Don't prescribe and dictate how they all had to do it. Now, there was a lot of negotiation that happened through that process, but it's really exciting to see that you all are moving in the right direction with updating some of your procurement strategies. Really, Why is this important for Independence? Independence is being recognized right now in the metropolitan area, across the state of Missouri, across the state of Kansas, and even into Iowa and Nebraska as a leading and innovative city. And I think there's some other topics you all are even maybe talking about tonight later that involve innovation and technology and thought leadership. And I wish I could present a map that shows how the country has adopted this integrated idea of integrated project delivery. It started on the coasts and it's just merged, you know, here into the middle of the United States. And every project has been extremely successful. It's all about partnership. It's all about integration. You know, these are award-winning things that attract some of the best contractors in the Midwest, which what a lot of cities don't realize is you all compete. You compete for the best. We can take our A team and we can go to Olathe or Lee Summit or anywhere. We can go anywhere. We want our A team to be in places that want to do business with us, that approach projects with a partnership mentality, that want projects to be done successful. And so these are shining examples that Tim and his staff, you know, manage. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to risk management. That's where all the dollars are. With design, build, and construction manager at risk, you're getting to a GMP, guaranteed maximum price, much, much sooner than conventional methods. As he mentioned, the Spear and Doctrine and other, you know, legalese require basically that whenever you all issue a set of plans that is 100% designed to a set of contractors to bid, the only thing that makes, he said, the lowest and qualified, not only the lowest but best, quote unquote, best value right now in integrated and conventional methods, all you got to do is have a bid bond. It's a very, very low bar to enter into contracts with you all. This is a way to enhance competition, to bring the best of the Midwest, the best talent has to bear to work on projects in this city. And so, again, I could go on and on about this. I don't want to talk all night, but I really appreciate you all being here. And I think the thing that I wanted to impress upon you more than anything is just that cities do compete, and the contracting and design community is looking at cities and placing their assets with communities that want to partner. And we have seen that play out in Independence, so it's very exciting to see it hopefully continue.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Councilman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I remember correctly, Mr. City Manager, this is the type of design bill that we're looking at for the proposed police building.
For the Justice Center?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to working through that. Another big project. We'll see how that plays out at the end, but we got some good stuff ahead, so thank you for your interest.
Appreciate it.
Any other comments or questions? Well, I know that the two of you have been going around quite a bit giving this presentation, and we appreciate it. We appreciate you sharing outside of the four walls of our great city, you know, the things that are happening here and the decisions and the actions that this council has taken to really be leaders in economic development and policies that direct economic development, which we're about to hear a little bit more about here in just a few minutes. And you know, we are very proud of the projects that we've been able to complete for the benefit of this entire community. And I would say that all goes back a couple of years to, you know, a lot of work done throughout this community, coming up with the need to do a strategic plan, developing that strategic plan. Shortly after that, starting on the comprehensive development plan, we're going to hear about our proposed economic development policy. And, you know, all of that work coming together through, you know, consulting with our citizens, with our Economic Development Corporation, with our Chamber of Commerce, with our school districts, has really taken us far in a short period of time. So we're, you know, I don't think people think about the intersections when they're driving through them, you know, and they want them to function properly. I learned a lot about what goes into designing and building an intersection. It's a lot more intense than just throwing some pavement down. And, you know, I think we've really shown how this, I mean, obviously we have. We won an award that we were competing against 4 other states and, you know, hundreds of other cities to receive the award on our intersection improvement plan. So we have lots of future needs in our city, especially when it comes to infrastructure, circulation, connection, trails, and these are the types of policies that are going to help us really make good decisions and see a lot of forward progress in those areas. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And sharing that.
Thank you all.
Yes, thanks, Brian. Okay, next, Mr. City Manager, is proposed public art policy for the City of Independence.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, through the work of the Mayor's Commission on the Arts, city's been working to promote public art and incorporate that into our public improvement projects. But we have been doing so really without any formal adopted policies of what that might look like. So tonight, Stacy Short, who is chairperson of that commission, is here to share with the council a proposed policy. It is our intent then to place that before the council in May for formal consideration. But tonight, Stacy's going to preview that and see if there's any additional input the council would like to consider.
Okay,
Stacy.
thank you.
So you have that material in your packet, I presume. Good, because I don't have a presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a little additional material. We have a meeting this Thursday where the Visual Arts Rights Act is going to be presented to our group, so we want to include that. We're not exactly sure how it should be included, so we're going to have to leave that to the staff. If it's, that's a federal law, so we'll have to decide how that fits into the presentation. We'll have staff advise us, I suppose. So the good news and the bad news, I guess, is the good news is there are a lot of people and resources for policy across the country, and the bad news is that this group of esteemed members of the Arts Commission is really not, they're really not policy writers. So we've just kind of gathered all the good news and put it together. This is a pretty brief and general policy description for the commission in hopes that it would give then an opportunity for all the additional parts to go along with this policy, like the way the Percent for Art program is a ordinance. We would then be adding or amending to that policy for the additional programs. For example, the mural program policy would be next to be added, and so forth. So all the parts that are necessary. So this is just the beginning of a whole combination of the kind of policies that we need to move forward with public art and culture in the city. This is pretty much just swiped from Bentonville, Arkansas.
Okay. Okay, thank you. It was included in everybody's packet, the proposed public art policy. So unless you have other things to share, then we can open that up for any questions or discussion on the proposed public art policy. Anything? Okay.
Looks like there's a lot of good information here. It's
well, I will.
Wow.
The Arts Commission has been working on this for quite some time, and you know we're trying to really. I'm working with them to try to really get this completed and adopted by the council, because there's a tremendous amount of interest that we're starting to receive of artists who would like an opportunity to display in our city, and we really need to set these rules before we can accept some of those offerings. This is important. We need to ensure that our public art policy covers both the quality of the art that is displayed, location, maintenance, sustainability. So I would encourage the council members to, do spend some time reviewing this. If you have feedback, please provide it to Mark Randall, who is our staff liaison for the Arts Commission. We've got a lot of exciting things on the horizon that we would like to do to continue to celebrate our city's history, enhance our commercial areas, and beautify our city. So this is a step in the right direction. It's, as Ms. Short said, I mean, writing policy isn't the most glamorous part of our jobs, but we do need to make sure that we get this right so that we end up with the end product that we all want and can be proud of.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I was in Liberty a couple of weeks ago, and they have some really cool public art, and there's a piece up there that's shaped like a heart, and it's made out of diamond plate, which is really cool. I thought, man, that would be just neat to have something similar to that in between Inglewood and the square with our Heart Connect, but then I thought we have no policy for that. I thought,
So this is a big, important step.
Important step.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councilman?
Having been in a couple of things with you and at that other town, I forget its name. The important thing there, as I heard, and it was there, is use artists, work with artists, and pay artists.
You got it, Tom.
To say, that we're welcoming and stuff, but to give them the fair value is also important too, and that should be in here, which it is. Thank you.
Well, I will just add one other note that the additional collateral material that I just gave you includes a last page that really wasn't solicited, but I wanted to add because it's always good to keep in mind those quick 10 topics that could be real pointers for the real value in art in our culture. So take a look at that, and the resources underneath each one of those are readily available at Americas for Arts. So we're following a national policy, and we're following a national trend, and I want to keep us right in the thick of it. So thank you all very much. If you have questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Tom can pass along to me, Mark can pass along to me, however that needs to happen. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next is our proposed economic development policy. Mr. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, one of the deliverables in Independence for All and our growth goal is development of an economic development policy to help guide and standardize and formalize our negotiations when public incentives are part of a development project, so that we have something that's well documented, that's transparent with the public, and will help staff bring forward proposals that make sense and have some sort of bearing in reality. So over the past several months, Assistant City Manager Mark Randall, who handles economic development portfolio for us, has been working with a number of constituencies and groups to ensure that we come up with something that has a lot of buy-in and support. It is our intention to place this on the May 6th council agenda for formal adoption. But tonight, Mark is going to present that to you again for some consideration and any input that you may have in advance of the meeting in 2 weeks. So I will turn it over to Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mark Randall, Assistant City Manager, and tonight I'm here to do a little presentation on proposed economic development policy for Independence. As you know, economic development policies have been in the news a lot lately. They're always a topic of discussion at the state capitol, and this last several months has been a very hot topic in the city of Kansas City. But a lot of cities are struggling with this, how to get the right balance between attracting development and being fair to taxing jurisdictions. So here in Independence, we've taken on an almost impossible task of trying to develop a policy which is attractive to the job creators and developers, but is also fair to those taxing jurisdictions, and try to get a policy that we can all support. So to that end, draft policy, we've been working on it for several months, and we've got, in the process, we've asked for input from many of our community partners. We've had review and comment from a good many of them. And they've provided suggestions that we've incorporated into the draft. And these community partners that we've talked to would include 3 of the 4 school superintendents in our community have weighed in on this. We never did get any comment back from Raytown, but the other 3 school districts weighed in and provided us with some fantastic input. Tom Lesnick with the EDC, who's here tonight, and hopefully at the end of the presentation he may be able to weigh in a little bit here on the value of having a policy of this type. Bond counsel at Gilmore and Bell, and David Martin with Gilmore and Bell, he's here also to answer any questions you might have about specifics of how some of these programs work. Our financial advisors at Springstead, members of the TIF Commission, and members of the newly created Economic Development and Incentives Commission that you all created a few months ago. And as you know, both of those organizations have representatives from the schools, libraries, the county, from various taxing jurisdictions. The Mayor's Leadership Exchange Group has reviewed it and provided comment, and we've even bounced it off of some of the economic development professionals in the Kansas City area to get their input as well. And we have a product now that has met with general approval from those folks. So we feel like now it's a policy that is a blend of some of the existing practices we already had. It adds some best practices that we have learned about, and it incorporates some new ideas that we've come up with. And so now the time is to present it to the council for your consideration, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So in your packet you have a copy of this presentation, but also of the whole policy. But I want to just apologize that we had a little formatting problem when it got printed, when it came off of the Novus agenda, but the original ordinance, I'll assure you, is formatted correctly, and it will be when it comes before the council next. So first of all, going to the presentation. Okay, purpose. It's, of course, to promote economic development and prosperity and independence. And it's to provide guidance to developers and city staff on the use of incentive tools. And it's to achieve the objectives set forth in the 2017-22 Independence for All strategic plan that Zach mentioned a minute ago, through a thoughtful approach to economic development in our community. Now, if you remember the Independence for All strategic plan that you all came up with, it was pretty ambitious. It had, I believe, 74 different strategies for bettering this community. And one of those strategies said, update the economic development policy to guide decision-making and ensure a progressive and effective approach to public incentives. But that isn't the only one of those 74 strategies that are in that strategic plan that this policy touches on. That policy, the strategic plan also called for increase economic prosperity, attract and retain quality employers, increase the number of good-paying jobs, increase household income, grow retail and commercial businesses, support industrial and office development, identify economic development needs and goals, assist the EDC to recruit and retain businesses, increase per capita sales tax collection and pull factor, grow and diversify revenues, support development along key corridors, attract and retain visitors to the community, improve partnerships and coordination with local school districts, more on that later, and communicate more effectively both internally and externally, improve financial analysis and reporting on development incentives. So all of those strategies and goals that were in our strategic plan were all to lead to that vision that tied it all together, which, just to remind everyone, the vision of that strategic plan was our quality neighborhoods, 21st century jobs, growing economy, safe, family-friendly community, and cultural diversity makes Independence, Missouri a nationally recognized city with a unique history and sense of place. Now, this policy is not intended to be a listing of all the economic development tools that are available out there. Developers know them just as well as we do. They can go on the Department of Economic Development website, they can see all the state programs, so that's really not what we're trying to accomplish here. Really, the focus is on tools that can be impacted by policy decisions that you make. So the tools that we're really focusing on here under tax abatement is Chapter 100, in Chapter 353. And under special funding districts, we are talking about tax increment financing, or TIF, neighborhood improvement district, or NID, and community improvement district, SIDS. Now, it does touch on some other programs that are at least referred to, and where additional information can be found. These would include our policy, because we have other tools in our toolbox, as was mentioned earlier about the idea of having tools in the toolbox. Eminent domain, infrastructure agreements, waiver of fees, favorable utility rates, waiver of city property tax on personal property, opportunity zones, which we're one of the towns that's uniquely qualified in that area, since we have 4 census tracts in our community that are eligible for opportunity zone projects. And those are really important because a developer could come in and do a project in an opportunity zone and have capital gains waived if they hold an investment for 10 years. But there's other parts to the opportunity zone story. Then again, the state of Missouri incentive programs, we didn't want to regurgitate them here and repeat them all, but it provides a link to them so you can find out more about them, and other funding districts that really aren't affected by council decision making or policy making. So the first one, we're talking about Chapter 100. That's kind of the popular one right now for industrial development particularly. And the minimum requirements that we're setting here is, the first and most important one is really to say that we're starting the conversation saying that we want to limit public participation at 20% of the project. Now, it also says in there that this is a flexible policy, so if it's warranted, you can negotiate what you think is appropriate. I know that when we were talking about Amazon going somewhere in the country, everybody was talking about a lot better than that. But to start the conversation, this would be where we would talk about. And when you think about that number, 20% of public participation, it kind of reminds you of like all the grants that you're used to getting. You're always getting infrastructure grants for highways and everything, and water system projects. A 20% match of a federal grant is pretty common practice. So if you had to do a 20% local match for a project that brought jobs and prosperity to the community, that's a pretty good investment. So we'd like to talk about that as a fair limit or cap to start the conversation about public participation. Secondly, another minimum requirement is that it would demonstrate that the project is not feasible without public participation. If we don't have to do it, we don't want to do it, but if they will need to demonstrate that the project is not feasible without it. They also have to demonstrate that benefits to the community must justify the impact on the taxing jurisdictions that are affected. And the city will not back project bonds. And whatever is done has got to conform with the city's comprehensive plan, which you've set out. That's the rules we need to live by, and that's what we're going to do. And all of these will require to be consistent with that.
Mark?
Yeah.
If I may?
Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry. What was the policy?
Well,
If they had 20%, is this an incentive program to say that, or is this a change?
You really haven't had a policy in that regard.
So this is to help, okay.
Right. It's to trying to bring some order to what has been a chaotic negotiation process in not just this community, but in every community. So,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So going on with the minimum requirements, and these are ones that the council came up recently, and again, like I said, this policy incorporates some of the practices that we've already adopted, but projects must make provision for litter and trash cleanup, walkability, and security. 1% for the arts contribution, which you were hearing about a minute ago, 1% of the amount of the city's property tax abatement has to be put aside for public art, up to a maximum of $10,000. And projects must demonstrate sustainable practices, including energy efficiency. Now, there's another part of this whole thing where they have to meet the minimum requirements, but there's also a set of criteria in there that are labeled most favored. So what we'll do is report back to you how a particular project rated on this most favored thing. These are not things that are minimum requirements that they have to do, but it's things you'd like to see if you'd like to see, and you'll rate them more favorably if they do it. And one of those is wages that exceed 120% of the Jackson County average, and projects with payments in lieu of taxes that are greater than the minimum amount required by this policy. Now, when we start talking about the amount of abatement and the pilot, again, we're going to say that if a development comes in, they're going to have to keep paying the taxes they're already paying. So this is talking about beyond that base with the new development. And we're going to say that the public participation in form of abatement is going to be capped at an amount. Let's say it's 20%. But then how do you give that 20% out? In what increments? Over what period of time? Well, this chart that you have in front of you is a guide to use in answering that question. If you look at this chart, you'll see that there is, in every row, there is an 80%. Those 80% all line up kind of diagonal there in a line. Okay, now if you had a diagonal line where those 80s are at, everything to the left of that chart, those are abatement levels you already have in your enhanced enterprise zone ordinance. So most of Independence is in an enhanced enterprise zone, and those are the amounts of abatement that you currently get if you put in a development in an enhanced enterprise zone. If you create so many jobs and you invest so much money, that's the amount of abatement you could get over 10 years. So the enhanced enterprise zone, though, has kind of gone a little bit out of favor. In more, Chapter 100 is considered more attractive to developers now because it goes beyond those limits. So if you look towards the right side, this takes the enhanced enterprise zone abatement and extends it on out. And you really have to do that because that's where you'll have to live for some of these bigger projects. You notice that on that chart, some of the numbers on the lower right are in red. What those red numbers indicate is actual projects in 5 communities here in the metro area that went to this level of abatement to get those projects. If you're talking about a project with over 300 jobs and $75 million in investment, they would want an 85% tax abatement for 17 years, or whichever the 20% cap, whichever you came to first. So that's really is kind of where you need to live,
Mark?
to be competitive. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes.
Oh. Yeah. Sorry.
This Chapter 1 tax abatement projects, provisions, are you telling me that that's not mandatory?
No.
Okay, but that would be the recommended, and you bring it back as these people did that, or these people wouldn't do this? Each of the contracts is what you said was most favored?
Councilmember DeLucy, I'm sorry, I'm trying to hear Councilman Van Camp. Go ahead.
Well, a developer would come and he would ask for this. He'd show, first of all, that he can't put in this 300 job facility unless he gets some public participation, and let's say that he makes a great case that he needs 20% public participation. And he'll do 80%, but he maybe needs 20% public participation over a period of time to make it fly.
So these are incentives?
Yes. So what it is, the base that he's already paying, he's going to pay that base. But he's going to want a portion of that additional taxes abated for him, and that's how he's going to make this work. But the reason why you'll notice none of it is at 100%, because in our conversations with the school, they really do not like incentive programs that have 100%. So many of them do. They'll start with 100% for the first few years, and then it'll ratchet down. But the schools have said, they really would like to get some positive gain right at the get-go on a project.
As we all would.
As we all would. So
Yes.
even though they understand the need to incentivize a project like this over time, they still would like to see some money, some new money coming in addition to what the base is. They like to see some new money coming in right out of the chute. So that's one of the things we've done here with this, is that everything is nothing is 100%.
So this is the funneled down of everything that we could have went to, and you're saying these are the best, or the most popular option, okay.
Right. We've actually tried to make it competitive, but yet not a free-for-all, not a giveaway.
Where it goes,
Yeah.
you know, the arts and that stuff, you're saying that those, I mean, they could have went anywhere. There's several of them, but this is the consensus.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, the next thing in here is talking about the Chapter 353 tax abatement, and that's one that was mostly associated with a redevelopment type of a project. And in this case here, what they're used to seeing is typically, I mean, 353 projects can run 25 years, and it starts out in the law saying 100% for the first 10 years, and then it'll ratchet down to 50% thereafter. That's kind of what the world started at. But now, people are trying to pull back on that a little bit, and so in this case here, what we're saying is we're going to do a 75% abatement for the first 10 years and 37.5 thereafter until the cap is reached. And the public participation cap will not just be necessarily 20%, but it'll be based on an amount of investment and jobs created. So the following table is going to be used for 353 and TIF to try to figure out what that cap should be. And I want to mention that in our survey, 6 cities we talked to, they currently are trying to do a cap of 15%. Then 3 that we talked to are at 20% now, and 2 are at 25%, and but all of them are flexible, so that, for example, one of the ones that was 15% actually ended up negotiating a 22% cap for a project that was a really, really big project, which everybody in the metro area really wanted to get that project, but that's where they went. So we're pretty close to that. We're competitive, and this policy makes us competitive, as we showed you in that chart before. So,
excuse me, Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember.
Mark, I'm just having trouble understanding. Where did these numbers come from? This chart, did we create it, or did we steal it from Omaha or Bentonville, or what?
Well, this one here, as I say, half of this chart is what you've already adopted when you did the Enhanced Enterprise Zone ordinance a few years back, several years ago.
Okay, so we have part of this chart already in an
Right.
ordinance.
Yes.
Okay.
So what we're saying is extending that out for larger projects, which are even more investment and even more jobs.
And where did those numbers come from?
That's just extending those out.
Okay, we extrapolated out.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly right. And it just so happens that hits exactly where some of the other people are at that have been successful on some of these big projects in the metro area. So.
And then the second one.
The second one, this one is just based on, as I just mentioned to you, some of the communities have in our survey, no one really has a very comprehensive program, or policy. There's some that have parts of a good policy, but we found, as I said, several were at the 15% cap. Some were at 20, and some, or even a couple, were even at 25. But then they're all flexible, so it isn't like this is set in stone, because one of the ones that says their cap is 15, they did 22 on a very big project that was really important to them.
So Mark, can you tell us, maybe you don't have them memorized off the top of your head, but give us an example of the peer cities that you're looking at when you're surveying.
Well, one of those ones in red would have been the Forencia, whatever however you pronounce it, the auto parts manufacturer in Blue Springs that we were very close to getting, and of course our utility bills our electric utility rates played a role in that, but also just in the general competitiveness, they're one of those ones that's colored in red there. Another
we don't
one,
have colored ones.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's on there. But maybe you can't see color from there, I guess, can you? Well, let me go back. Yeah, see the red there? We need some binoculars here for you. Yeah, that's tough. But anyway, let me just say the ones in the lower right-hand corner.
The lower right that are in red, those are in the 85-15, 83-17 range. So, as an example, the project in Blue Springs, they are in that range. Their public participation for that project was in the 80 to 85% range.
Right. Now,
correct?
to be totally honest about it, in their case, it was actually, they were one of the ones that were 100% at the beginning, then ratcheted down.
Right.
But transferring that into what our school districts are asking for is never do 100%. They'd much rather see something that's 85% over a period of time than have something that's 100 for a while and then drops to 60 or 50, or, they'd rather see it where there's something coming in at the beginning. So that's real. That's that converted to have nothing that's 100. The other ones were some other ones in the metro area that were actually in those amounts.
Mark, I'm sorry, but when you say something is capped at 85%.
No.
Okay, tell me.
Well, what I mean is 85% would be the amount of new taxes that is being abated. So they'll pay 15% they'll pay their base tax already. They'll pay 15% of the new tax on the new development. And they would do that for, let's say in this one case, say 12 years. That's the abatement they would get until they hit the cap of maximum public participation. Because remember, one of the first parts of this is we're capping public participation. So it isn't like you're going to abate 85% of the taxes forever or for 25 years or anything like that. You're doing it until the cap of public participation is reached.
And the cap is measured in time? Like, no matter what money is paid, at 15 years, it's over. Is that what you're saying?
Right. All right. Once you hit, say, the 20%, if it's 20% is the negotiated amount of public participation, then you would use this chart to figure out how much is going to be abated at the beginning and through a period of time. But as soon as they hit the cap, it's done. So they may not get to 17 years if you had a cap of a certain amount. But this is the point where you start your discussions.
So I just want to interject something at this point. Everything still needs to come to the council for approval. This
Absolutely.
is just
Right.
and I'm going to have Tom probably talk about this as well, this isn't to say, a developer's going to walk in the door, we're going to offer them this, and they're going to take it, and off they go with 85% tax abatement.
Right.
That's never
Right.
going to happen.
Yep.
These are simply policies to let the development community know what we are willing to consider as we negotiate these incentives. And the council they still go through the TIF commission.
Oh, yeah, the processes.
They go through all these processes.
Got
and
processes coming up as the later slide.
Before people start, getting
Absolutely.
concerned that we're, guaranteeing or pledging these funds. This, is all still council subject to council approval before we give any development incentives.
And I think the message here is that this is an attempt to limit, not to expand.
Right.
This is trying to put a cap. This is trying to limit the amount, because right now the usual ask is 100% of the total tax increment. And it would go on for, they'd like to have the maximum allowance of law, which could be 25 years. So, I mean, that's kind of where you start, but that's not where you want to be today. You want to be in a point where everyone's being a little rational about this, and you don't want to be in a situation where the developer asks for the moon, and then you act like you never heard of incentives. I mean, that's just kind of ridiculous. You want to get to the point where you're talking realistically what is really needed to make it work for them, but to also make it fair for the taxing jurisdictions.
So, Mr. Randall, where did the second chart come from?
This one here?
The chapter 353 in the TIF?
Yeah, that's created. That's a new idea because it's basically taking the idea of, let's suppose if you were one of these communities that has a 15% abatement cap, that might not work for a bigger project.
So we created this in-house?
Yes.
The city staff created
So it's an attempt to sort of bridge between a half a dozen communities that I could name that have 15% as their cap, but then some have 20% as a cap, and some have two that I know have 25% as a cap. But the idea here being is like, well, rather than just saying 15, let's say we'll start at 15 if it's kind of a small project, but we'd go up higher if it's warranted. And I think that's what you need to do to be competitive.
So it was created in consultation with the other taxing jurisdictions, not solely by city staff.
No, solely by city staff, but it's based on what other cities are doing.
But but this has been, as you mentioned earlier, reviewed by our other taxing jurisdictions.
Oh yes, oh yeah, absolutely.
So, Mark, this is an incentive program.
Mm-hmm.
to make it clearer and to bring people to us.
Right.
So when you mentioned Blue Springs and the other parts, because in previous meetings on the utility board, we found that hardly ever has the utilities made a difference. And they were willing to go at 100% and then knock it down. I mean, they said, we'll do 100, but they got in negotiations. You want our negotiations to start at a reasonable place instead of doing that.
So then under TIF, if you just go by the law, by the TIF statute, it could be 100% abated for 10 years and then 50% thereafter for 23 years. But that's not where you want to be. So therefore, again, drawing this back, that what we want to do is we'll start at a lower amount. And what we want to do here, since there is in TIF, there is a 50% sales tax contribution to it. We're talking about a 50% then property tax would be the amount of abatement that would be done, and along with the sales tax, and that would then that's how they would get the money that would be contributed to the maximum that we participate in, say like the 20%. So now again, another thing about this one is we're a minimum requirements that they we don't want to cannibalize existing retail. So we're not going to incentivize things against ourselves. So this is one of the things we need to be aware of when we're looking at TIF. As far as neighborhood improvement districts and community improvement districts, they're a little different animals because they're taxing themselves to do something. They're creating a tax or an assessment on themselves. And so, but it's a little different. The city does still have they can't do it without your approval. So we want to make sure that they know that that when they do a project, you want to make sure that it fits comprehensive plan, that it's beneficial. In fact, you look most favorably on something. If they're, for example, going to build some streets or improve streets, which you are going to improve yourself anyway someday, that's great. And also you want provisions for the public arts, sustainability, walkability, and security. Those are all favored. They're not required in this case since this is their money and you're trying to be a little respectful of that fact. But it is something that you want done. Then moving on to that process, the end of the policy has an application. So we'll do this now. We'll ask them to fill out this application. It'll be reviewed by the city staff, but there's a new step in here, which you created a couple months back, which was this new Economic Development and Incentives Commission. In the past, only review was done by the TIF Commission for TIF applications. Now you've got a board that is going to review all applications, and that board is just like the TIF Commission with representatives from all the school districts, all the taxing jurisdictions. So they will make a recommendation to you. And we'll have a term sheet to finalize what the understanding is with the developer, and then it will come to you for approval of a development agreement. And then the decision will be yours based on that. But our purpose in this was to try to get a semblance of order and a little bit of out of the chaos, and to try to get some realistic expectations between both parties. But what I really like is that we have this new level of oversight and recommendation. We have an application. It's all going to be very transparent. So we're very excited about that aspect of it in particular. Now, before we take any questions, I thought that Tom Lesnick, he's the president and CEO of our chamber and our EDC, if he would come up, he could explain to you why in today's environment having a policy of this type is important. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Tom Lesnick, President of the Independence Economic Development Council. The one thing, I'll mention actually two things very quickly. The first thing is that from a marketing standpoint, to be able to tell prospects we're working with, what the resources are that can help support their project is very important. Right now, under the current environment, we may be working a project, we know all the parameters of the project, but all we can say is, well, we have Chapter 100 available. So we can't give them any quantitative information in terms of what we can do for them as a community to help support their project. With this policy, now we have something written. And incentives are not the first thing that come up in the conversation, but they eventually do come up. And right now, projects move so quickly is that it doesn't take long to get to that incentive process. The way we do it right now, the incentive process takes a long time because it goes through the process of getting to City Council, a recommendation coming from city staff as well as the EDC. Sometimes that process is too long. If we have a policy in place that we can share with prospects, it helps them to understand kind of what the guidelines are, where the city possibly could be, and from there they can extrapolate the numbers and get an idea of what that benefit might be. The other thing I'll mention is that this policy and these incentives apply equally to a new project as well as an existing project. So a company in our community that wants to expand, they play by the same rules. We don't treat anybody differently. We love to attract and we love to bring new jobs into the community, but we also want to support the companies who are here, companies who are growing, and the companies who have added to our economy for a number of years. So it treats both attraction and retention on an equal basis, and that's a good thing.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So if you have any questions, like I said, David Martin with Gilmore Bell's here, and he can also talk to you about really details of any of these particular tools, how they might work. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to. I know it's complicated to go over, but we have to start at some point, so that tonight's the night to start the conversation. So go ahead.
I have a question. If I were a developer and I was presented with a chart that doesn't say the words up to, I'd assume that if I was investing $10 million, I would definitely get, and creating 50 jobs, I'd get 16%. Do other cities actually have charts like this?
No. No, they would just
So
say,
how is a developer, I mean, I can see,
Well, I
not,
think that
maybe
would
not
be-
us, but a future council, well, I'm a developer and I looked at your chart, this is the chart the city created, and it says I get 19%.
Well, I think our idea is to tell them what it is that we would do, and we would be forthcoming with it, so that to take the mystery out of it. And if everybody can agree, and the taxing jurisdictions is the very difficult part. If we can get this where all the taxing jurisdictions are comfortable with this, then that makes it so much easier for us to sell this in our negotiation. That, like I said, if he came in at 16%, that's a pretty good number, and it's fair based on the numbers of jobs and his investment.
Okay,
So that
maybe
would
I'm
be a
not
good number.
understanding the process. The review by the commission is this Economic Development Commission you've talked about.
Correct.
If they say no,
It's a
does it
recom-
even come up to us?
Yeah, it's a recommendation. They're a recommending body, this new commission is. They recommend to you. Right. So probably the way we see it happening more often would be, if these are acceptable limits to everyone and they're not extreme, they're just fair, more likely the request would be for more. And so they would probably be making the case why they don't need just 16%, why they need 22. And like I said, one of the communities that had a cap, and like I said, everybody's flexible on this. One of them said their cap for all projects start at 15%, it's where their discussion starts, but they did 22 on a very important project that they ended up doing. So we're kind of the same way, but we're saying like, hey, we're trying to make this a little bit fitting the circumstances. So I don't know if David has any, he might be able to share with you a little bit about how that negotiation might happen with a developer.
Sure. David Martin with Gilmore and Bell. And I guess I would say, to back Mark up with his matrix that he's put together, is that we are seeing this as being enforced as a limitation. So a lot of the original asks in other communities are higher or significantly higher than what he has put together in the matrix for each of these different types of incentives. So this would help to act as a ceiling in terms of developers would not expect that they could ask for more than that, and start, as he described, as sort of a reasonable starting point for the negotiation. There's always back and forth in terms of the early negotiations as far as what they're going to produce, whether the city wants to incentivize that particular project, and this would just be a bearing point to where if the city was interested in incentivizing that project, they could point to it as a reasonable starting point for the incentive negotiations.
I'm afraid it's going to be a floor is my problem. It could be seen as a floor, right?
It could be.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Yes.
Yeah, it seems to me that this is forward-thinking enough that it gives the, really the groundwork for any start of negotiations and gives a little bit more light to the whole process, because then they see, you know, what the process is. You've got it listed out here, the application, the review of commission, the terms, and it gives them the guidelines of what this city has decided they would be willing to negotiate from, and a starting point. And I would think, and this is a question maybe for any of the three of you, I don't know if there's any cities around us that are doing this right now. I suspect there's not, but there's probably other cities in the United States that are doing this, and it gives them a leg up, because then there's already a document, and developers that want to come in already can see the lay of the land, basically, before they even come in, instead of going in like the Wild West and starting to try to negotiate, which can take weeks, months, or years sometimes. So I would think it would give us a head start. And it might set the standard for this region as far as development. And obviously the council has gone on record with a strategic plan that we do want to encourage companies to develop more jobs and bring more jobs to Independence. That drives the economic engine for Independence. So thank you. And if you want to try to answer that question about other communities, I don't know if you know if there's other communities that have this type of document. You want to comment on that?
So as far as just the general policy, there are several other surrounding communities that have an economic development policy. With respect to laying out the procedure for the incentives to be granted, there's kind of the full gamut. Some communities don't have any procedural direction in their policy. There are other communities that are very specific and even have more detailed specifications for how that process is going to work. In consulting with Mark on this project, we tried to kind of land in the middle, where you provide enough direction in order to give an idea to the developer of how things are going to progress without tying staff in the city's hands to the point where anything that is slightly out of the ordinary becomes an aberration from the policy.
Has that helped some of those cities that have a policy that are more specific? Has it helped with some of their?
I think the ones that are more specific than what you're looking at today have found that they're sometimes tied by the specificity, basically, and they're less able to adapt to a changed condition for a particular project, because these projects are fairly unique in terms of what you're trying to fund, the level of participation that's going to be granted, the types of incentives that are going to be granted. If you try to lay out every single particular, it's very difficult to predict what you're going to end up wanting to do later on.
Thanks.
One thing I did want to add to Councilmember DeLucci's comment, that in that case, that one, the 16, I would say that is the floor. But see, what we were trying to do is compromise the fact that the two numbers most common, it seems, around here is 15% and 20%. 15% is probably just too low of a cap, especially when you start getting up towards the higher amount of jobs and investment. But yet, do you want to give 20% to smaller projects? So what we try to do is bridge the gap between the 15 and 20. We're trying to compromise it, just as everything else in this is trying to be a compromise. You can go from the 15 to the 20 based on the amount that you're trying to invest, that you're going to invest with us. So we could have said that you could do away with that chart, and then you have to decide, okay, what is your cap? Are you going to go with 15, as half a dozen cities we surveyed do? Or would you go with 20, as another half a dozen have 20 or better? So we felt like, well, what we'll do is try to compromise that out on a matrix, that the more you do, the more you'll get. So the cap is higher depending on the amount of investment in jobs. So you're kind of right. It was, in that case, it would be considered by them the floor, but that's kind of our intent, because we're saying, yeah, we'll go 16, not 20.
So, Mark, back to some of your opening remarks. I mean, I think that it's important to keep in mind that what you said earlier is this is for projects that are determined that would not happen without some type of public incentive. This isn't
Correct.
just open to everybody who wants to open up a business in Independence or grow their business in Independence. I mean, this, and Mr. Lesnick can probably talk to us about the number of projects that come our way that require an incentive. If they're coming to our EDC, most likely there are, but there's a lot of capital investment being made in our city that have asked for no incentives. So it's still, the determination of the council whether or not they even want to do the project. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, quite frankly, that's the goal we go towards is not using incentives. And we have a lot of projects and a lot of, developments in the community that have happened without incentives, and that's great. The last thing we want to do is take money away from our taxing entities. It hurts the community, but sometimes it's necessary because we're competing with other communities who are willing to do that. It's just kind of the game that we're in. Now, I think when you talk about, is this the floor? From my standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, I say here's the rules we're playing by. But if somebody comes to us and says they've got 100 jobs that pay $80,000 a year, you know what? We're going to have a conversation, and they can make the case to us that they deserve to be higher than where that number is. But again, that's the responsibility on them, not on us. And then it's the job of the council to evaluate whether or not that project is worthy of something beyond what is stated in that policy. And ultimately, it is always the council's decision in terms of what we do in terms of that. It's just really for us, it's a guide to go by that we can safely talk with projects about what we can potentially offer to them if they come to Independence.
Yes.
Tom, having been on several occasions with you to do these things, I traveled a lot to find out about IPL, find out about energy capacity, how it works and stuff like that. And I still have questions and I still want to learn. I haven't got an idea here. This, for me, brings about what your expertise is. You think this is a good thing?
I do. Certainly I support it. I've been involved in kind of the initial development of it. This has been vetted through our other taxing districts. The nice thing about this is that with Chapter 100s, other taxing districts really don't get a say at all. It is entirely up to the city council. You can do anything you want to. You can give 100% and negatively impact any of our school districts. Now they have a voice because they're involved in that review process, and they are buying into this. And quite frankly, it's more transparency for stuff we're doing in economic
So
development.
it's a
which I
better
think is a good
selling
thing.
point
It
when
is.
they come to the table.
It is.
Or before they come to the
Yeah,
table.
exactly.
Which is what we're reaching out to,
Yep.
as we have talked before. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman?
Madam Mayor. Mark, the concern that I have, or a concern that I have, is I don't want to stifle development in the first district side, being that we're definitely unique there. The more recent developments have not had any tax incentives. CSL did not have any tax incentive. They put $1.2 million in their project, give or take. The new gas station that's going to start work there, 24 in River, thank you. They're doing about $1.2 million project there. So as we move into trying to do things with Fairmont, I might have Tim's hair turn into a curl in a moment, but we've been discussing with MoDOT to do possibly a $10 million project from 291 down to Sterling. And we've had more discussions with them that if you're taking it to Sterling, can you take it from 24 Highway or from Sterling to Wilson Road? If they agree to do that, then there would be a big impact there, obviously, and there'd be more to roll out on that project. But if we do that, then that will open up some possible development and incentives long-term for Fairmont. So the question is, the gap that's there, we're starting at about 5 to 6 million. Is it reasonable to look at maybe at 2 to 4 million for other incentives there, or is there just a minimum amount we want to stick with and move forward with?
Well, again, we started with that minimum because that's what was the minimum on the enhanced enterprise zone that you had done before. And so that's kind of where we started. We do have other tools in the toolbox other than those. It may not be that if it's too small a project, and David can probably really talk to this better than I can, but I know if a project's too small, the costs of putting it together is probably not worth it. But and I know you might.
Well, the tools that
perhaps you could
The other
mention
tools
that.
here is the tools that we're kind of looking at with the beginning discussions of
Right.
the Fairmont group of what we can do and stuff. So a lot of those tools are definitely there to
You're right,
enhance.
and
I
that's
just
what we
want
can do.
anybody to fall through the cracks
Right.
as this gets moving, because
And
I'm
what-
anticipating in 5 years, 24 Highway should look completely different.
Right.
100% different.
One thing I forgot to mention was, and Tom Scannell was he probably was giving me mental vibrations here that I should remember, that the 353, we were talking about commercial, 353, not residential. So that's a whole different thing. We're not talking about that when we're talking about this policy here. So, but maybe, David, if you might, perhaps you could talk about scale of a project and whether these tools are worth it. If it's under like 5 million, is it worth doing?
Right, so you kind of have to look at the individual tool and the costs of implementing that tool. So if you're looking at tax increment financing, you're going to have a higher floor for the point at which it's worth implementing the tool, because it costs a fair amount of money to implement TIF. The procedure is fairly in-depth, and it takes a while to implement that tool in terms of notices have to be sent out, consideration at TIF commission level before it comes to the city council and so forth. So that's generally one of the more expensive tools to implement. Now, Chapter 100 on the other side is pretty quick as far as the information that needs to be put together and the time period for notices and so forth. It moves more quickly, it's less work, it costs less money. So you have a variety of tools in your economic development toolbox that you have in this policy, and you just kind of have to target it based on the particulars of the project, especially the size and the cost of the project, and figure out which one's going to be the most efficient in that particular instance.
Okay. That makes some sense. I'm just, don't want anybody to fall through the cracks. We're in a unique side of town there. I don't really foresee any $30 million projects coming anytime soon, but most certainly we can definitely hit the 1 to 5 million pretty quick over the next 5 years. So that's going to be a good thing.
Very good.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, next, CDBG Section 108 Program Overview. Mr. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, one of the tools that the City of Independence has at its disposal is the Federal Community Development Block Grant Funding. This is a program that was created in the 70s. Independence qualifies for about $750,000 annually to help support a variety of initiatives. There's, of course, guidelines around what types of projects would qualify for that funding. One of the unique tools available within that program is what's known as the Section 108 loan, which would allow us to accelerate some funding, and as we are looking to do, to try to make an impact in developing our corridors, address infrastructure issues, housing, facilities, et cetera. So tonight I've asked our Community Development Director, Tom Scannell, to present some information to the council on this program and try to solicit some feedback from the council if we believe this might make some sense for us. So I will yield to Mr. Scannell.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Zach did a pretty good introduction of what I'm going to present on tonight. So for over 40 years, the city has been receiving Community Development Block Grant Funds, also known as CDBG, from HUD, and we've been using those funds to assist low and moderate income population through various programs and services. As Zach alluded to, one of the unique features that was created as part of the original CDBG Act was Section 108, which is a loan guarantee provision of that program, which allows entitlement communities such as Independence a way to finance eligible economic and community development activities. It can be used for a wide range of economic development activities such as commercial, industrial development, business expansion, public infrastructure for economic and community development, as well as public facilities and housing repair or rehab. So as you can see, it's a fairly flexible and community impactful provision of the CDBG Act. And as an entitlement community, the city is eligible to partake in that program, but we have not previously used that. And I went black.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. There we go. Back on it. Don't know what I did. So the Section 108 program was set up to provide communities with a source of financing for a variety of eligible projects. It allows local governments to transform their small portion of CDBG dollars into federally guaranteed loans. These loans are then used to pursue physical and economic revitalization projects throughout the community. Under the program, entitlement communities can receive loan guarantees equal to 5 times their annual CDBG amount, which creates a much larger impact for their community. The Section 108 loan still allows the city to continue its current CDBG annual programming. The Section 108 funds can be used for a wide variety of uses, from acquisition of property for economic development activities, or construction or reconstruction or installation of public facilities. So, and those would be streets, sidewalks, or other site improvements. It can also be used for housing rehab and repairs, as well as assistance to business activities. To kind of give you an example on that, you can't use it to form or operate a small business. However, you can loan funds to that business so that that business could expand or create additional jobs. So in general, the funds must be used in accordance with the regulations of the CDBG program, which I will cover on this slide. So projects funded with these must meet the eligible criteria, which includes meeting the national objective. And there's 3 national objectives which are shown on the screen, but they also must pass a public benefit standards test. These projects also have to comply with local, state, and federal regulations. Now, there may be some activities that are CDBG eligible. For example, every year we fund public service. Those types of uses are not eligible for CDBG dollars. HUD also provides guidance on what other types of projects cannot, Section 108 loans cannot be used for. Projects where there is an insufficient level of public benefit are not eligible. And HUD provides guidelines on what they are looking for as far as the public benefit standards. Buildings that are used to conduct government activities, those are not eligible. And also projects, again, that do not meet the national objectives shown on the screen. So what are the advantages of Section 108? It leverages our annual CDBG annual allocation and creates a source of funds that is 5 times greater. Communities can receive the funds now instead of waiting for the funds or bonding for a project. The Section 108 loan is repaid over a multi-year period, which allows for the cost to be shared over that time frame. It is also long-term fixed rate financing at very favorable interest rates. That's usually below market rate, and also has very flexible terms. And lastly, it is not seen as a general obligation for debt purposes. So as you can see, the advantages make it a very flexible and impactful program. So who can apply for Section 108? Again, this program is set up where communities that receive the CDBG funds directly from HUD, such as independents, can apply to HUD to set up the loan program. And there's 2 ways to set that up. The first is submitting an application to HUD for a standalone site-specific project, or you can essentially establish a loan program where you identify the types of projects that the city would like to accomplish with those funds, and then you would have separate eligible projects apply to the city and go through that process. With any type of loan, underwriting is critical. You want to make sure that it's done per city and HUD standards, and HUD outlines their standards. And with any proper underwriting, the goal is you have the revenues there that repays the loan, so that you are not tapping into your CDBG dollars to affect the programming that's going on there. So all of the CDBG loans are fully collateralized. So what that means is that when you make your application to HUD, you are pledging that as a last resort, your current and future CDBG dollars are guaranteed in case there is any issue with repayment of those funds. However, when you are pledging those funds, HUD still allows you to allocate those dollars as you have in years past. So if you get $750,000, you still get to allocate those. So as with any loan, you want to make sure that the person that you're loaning the money to has security there, and HUD prescribes a number of ways that can be done, whether that's from a deed of trust on the project to be financed, other assets that are created from the use of those funds, or any other additional security. And you look at this on a case-by-case basis. In return for HUD's guarantee on the Section 108 loan, they are looking for a form of repayment. The last thing that they want is to use your annual allocation to repay the funds that were borrowed. So they're looking for project revenue. This could be whatever revenue is coming off of the project, or other dedicated revenue streams. If it happens to be in an area where you can capture pilots, which is the property tax, or each, where there's some sort of sales tax that's applied towards repayment of that, or any other additional loan security, such as a lien on the property. But all of these are fully vetted by HUD and must be included as part of the application. So I provided a lot of information on kind of what the Section 108 program is, how it can be used, and how it can be set up. So staff is seeking direction from the council to develop a pilot Section 108 loan program. And we're looking to support eligible activities that fall within the Independence for All strategic plan. Our application, we would seek the maximum amount, which is 5 times our annual CDBG allocation. And if council provides the direction to make the application to HUD, we would specify the types of projects, such as economic development, job creation, construction or reconstruction of public facilities, that would be funded by the 108 loan. I'm going to spend the next 2 slides kind of talking about the HUD approval process. The first slide really kind of covers applying to HUD to set up the 108 loan, and then there's a second slide after this one that covers the process for funding a project after our loan program has been set up. So as I mentioned, this slide covers the required HUD application process, from drafting the application that is reviewed both by the regional HUD office and also the HUD headquarters in DC. The process involves citizen participation, both on the Section 108 application, but also participation as part of our consolidated plan amendment. Once our application is submitted to the regional HUD office, that office will conduct a due diligence and compliance review and will check to ensure compliance with the above process, as well as verifying the national objective that is being met as part of the application, the types of eligible activities, certifications, and once this review is complete, the regional HUD office will forward the application to HUD headquarters along with a recommendation for approval or disapproval. Once the main headquarters of HUD receives the application, it's going through a full review by HUD headquarters staff. They make a recommendation. If the application receives an approval recommendation, it's forwarded to the Secretary of HUD for final approval. All of this process takes about 4 to 6 months. Assuming all that happens, we would be notified by the HUD office in DC, and then we would begin to set up the revolving loan. This process is much quicker, and we're dealing with the regional office, which is here in the Kansas City metro. And again, it's screening the potential project, underwriting that project, make sure we have security, repayments, all of those things, make sure it's meeting the eligible criteria, applying to HUD at the regional office. Regional office reviews it, we get their approval, we close the loan, we disperse and service the loan, and this process, as I mentioned, is much quicker, probably looking at about a 60 to 120 days. So in conclusion, the Section 108 program, it's a flexible program that provides communities with a source of financing for economic development, housing, rehab and repair, construction, reconstruction of public facilities, and other community development projects. This flexibility makes it one of the most potent and important public investment tools that HUD offers to local governments through the Community Development Block Grant Program. It leverages the CDBG dollars on a 5-to-1 ratio, and we are seeking direction to develop a pilot Section 108 loan program. The goal of our program would be for the proposed project to have sufficient cash flow, as I mentioned before, to repay the loan without any need for current or future CDBG dollars to be used for the repayment. That concludes that. I'm available for any questions.
Questions or comments?
I have a few questions. Tom?
Yeah.
Our annual allocation of CDBG money is how much?
This year it is slightly over $831,000.
Okay. And so I have so many questions. Have we been approached by anyone looking for the city to start this program?
I think the flexibility in this program, when I first heard of this could be used for a variety of different things, from job creation. It could be used to install infrastructure to jumpstart a industrial park. It could be used just for a variety of different things.
I got that, but has someone come to the city and said, we want the city to go into this Section 108 program?
The answer to that question is yes. I got a letter today, in fact, from HUD, and letting us know what our allocation would be this year and our allocation for the home program. And in that, I'm sure it's a form letter, I'm sure it's not personalized to the City of Independence, but it says it encouraged us to consider using this tool. I have spoken to Congressman Cleaver over the past number of years, who is on the HUD, is on the HUD committee in the U.S. Congress, and he's encouraged us to look at utilizing this tool. I am not clear, in answer to your question, Council Member, is do we select a project or do we solicit projects? I mean, we haven't solicited projects, so to speak, but I'm not sure, Mr. Scannell, how that works. I mean, the tool's not available, so it's hard to take,
Correct.
without it
And
being available, I don't know how we would solicit applications for it.
So what we're looking for tonight is for direction. If we get the direction, we would reach out to the HUD regional office and go through their best practices on how to set up the loan program with these types of projects. What do they recommend? What are their expectations, so that we're following the letter of what HUD is prescribing?
Okay, but as we sit here today, we don't have a site-specific applicant that says, I want the city to help me with this project.
That is correct. And
Okay.
that was the reason why we wanted to do the loan pool, so
Got
that
it.
we could then have this pool of funds, and in talking to HUD, use the best management practices for how to use this tool through this loan pool that we now
Okay,
have.
so I'm an applicant, and I came to the city and I did a 108 application, and my request is granted, and I'm given $400,000, right? And so I do my project. I fail. It doesn't work. What is the city's responsibility on that $400,000?
Depends on how that loan is structured. Like I said, the underwriting is key. We would make sure that the project, and HUD's looking at this too, to basically look at that the project costs are reasonable, that you have the financing available to complete the project, that the HUD funds are there just to supplement it. It's not there to fully finance your project.
But I failed, and so I'm now the city, and I'm now pretty much the guarantor of this $400,000. Am I now using my CDBG money in the future to pay that $400,000 back?
That is correct, yes.
Do we have the staff to administer this program?
There may be certain parts that we may have to contract out with. Perhaps the underwriting, that sort of thing. But there's ways that those costs can be covered. Having a third-party servicer, you can add on an additional point of interest, those types of things that can help fund those types of
Does the city dime pay the extra costs, or would the CDBG project pay the extra cost?
The CDBG project would pay the cost.
Even if we don't go forward with the 108 project?
If we
We
don't,
can still use our allocation to pay for that?
yes.
Okay.
Other comments or questions? Yes, Councilman.
So the first question has to do with the total amount we get every year from CBDG. So the loan that you're talking about setting up, the loan system, we could loan up to the full amount that we get every year, but it doesn't come out of our allocation. We still can give those to the service organizations, but it is a guarantee, like she was talking about,
That
for
is
future
correct, yes.
CBGG.
Yeah.
So in looking at the application process, The second step is conduct citizen participation. So this whole process would require us to set up a citizens advisory or citizens board that would review the applications, is that
No,
right?
we would take public comment like what we do on our annual action plan and our 5-year consolidated plan. We would
Okay.
have to do public participation.
So there wouldn't be a separate board or anything to oversee this?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And then toward the end on the revolving loan, it talks about disbursement and servicing the loan. So like Karen was just asking about servicing the loan, we don't have the staff right now to oversee loan disbursement and servicing. So we would use a third party? Is that what you're talking about?
Correct, and in researching this, there's a number of cities that have used a third-party servicer for setting up their, or servicing their 108 loans, and those funds are either paid through proceeds that are generated off that, or in the worst case, through CDBG dollars.
Okay.
Yes, Councilman?
So, this is a wonderful tool. The checks and balance in place for the applicants seems more than adequate. I mean, in the worst case scenario, we can pay for what a disaster that is being checked and balanced from the beginning. I mean, these applicants would be, and the negotiations on them would be for the pay of the third parties. There isn't much blowback on this, as I see it. It's been recommended highly by people that we know and trust.
Correct.
And it's been used with a great success in some circumstances.
That's correct. And one thing that I forgot to mention is there has been no defaults on any Section 108 loans.
Right, but
So-
you want to look at what and the worst possible scenario, that everything is devised not to happen. It would be yes, but we could even do it over time if that happened from future money that's
Correct,
coming
yes.
our way. Thank you for bringing this, and I know that other people have worked on this with you, and I want to tell everybody that this is another, as our esteemed city manager, or deputy city manager, in the toolbox.
Okay, very good. Anything, oh, yes, Councilman?
Sorry, thank you, Madam Mayor. I missed the opening remarks, so forgive me if I missed something here. So we get the pool set up, about $4 million, give or take. Do we still receive our regular allotment annually?
Yes, we do.
We do?
Yes.
On top of setting up that pool?
Yes, yes.
So we have $4 million here in a pool, then still annually, we still get the 800,000?
Yes, the 831 this year, whatever our number is next year, the year after that, we still get that amount, and we get to program that how we see fit.
So it's only if there's default somewhere along the line that year 2 of this project, then, or you, to use Councilwoman DeLucy's analogy, with the default, the 400,000, that could possibly come out of the future year of
Correct,
that.
yes.
But in the positive, that $400,000 investment was to move forward with no hiccups, so we still receive our annual allotment?
Yes.
Okay. On the forms of security, deed and trust, explain that to me. What does that mean specifically?
So that is, get to that slide. And again, and this is subject to HUD saying that it's okay to use that in that case. So that could be if you're going to do a project and their form of security is the property itself.
Gotcha.
Property has value, and if there happened to be a default, that city would then take that property, resell that, use the proceeds, and pay off that loan.
I was thinking, so I was wanting to make sure. think that was, if we were to create this fund, is there a time limit that we can have it, that we hold it? Do they hold it, do we hold it?
It is guaranteed by HUD, so it's their dollars, but it's just a promise that is being repaid back through the proceeds that are coming from the project.
So they don't upload that up front then?
What do you mean by upload?
Yes, you do.
They do upload
Yes.
that, okay.
Mhm.
So if we say we want to start this fund, Mr. Federal Government, then they will give us we'll set up the account, however that works. They'll drop the money in, then we will allocate through the proper procedures there.
Yeah, so that first step is the city would make their application for the types of projects that we would be interested in funding, getting approval from HUD for that, and then once we receive that approval, then we would go out through the proper channels that HUD prescribes to seek projects that we could then loan money to.
So we have to actively seek those then. Is that a criteria, or can we just sit on that and hope that maybe somebody comes through, or?
Either or.
Either way?
Yeah.
And can we only do one project at a time?
Through that revolving loan, no.
Okay, so we could do,
But each project through that revolving loan is a separate application to the HUD regional office. And each one is going to be evaluated through
Yeah,
all the
gotcha.
criteria. So there's a lot
So
of
it-
checks and balances.
okay, very good.
Still going, if I don't mind.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
we still have the pool of money. We spend down $1 million. So do they upfront that for the following, say, year 6? As the years progress, we got the 5-year, then we go into year 6, year 1 is done. Do they upload us another $1 million to keep that pool fully funded?
So if we have a loan amount of $4.1 million and say we loan $1 million, but that is paid off by year 5, by year 6 you have the 4.1 back.
Right,
to
but if
spend.
we do not, I mean, does that pool just stay until that money is recouped back?
Correct, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Interesting. This is an interesting way of doing some funding, but just want to make sure we do it correctly and we manage this correctly. 'Cause
That is key, yes.
The CDBG funds, when I was on the council the first time, we were doing about $1.2 million a year. We're down to $800,000, so it's kind of, depending on what administration's in office, they threaten to cut every 4 years. It seems like something's going to be cut. So it's an interesting concept to move forward with this.
Anything else? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now we're going to move on to our staff reports. Our first is Blue Valley Power Plant discussion. This isn't so much of a report from our staff. We had a study session regarding this topic a couple weeks ago. We had the first reading and public hearing last week. Several questions were posed by the council at this study session a couple weeks ago. Some responses have been given. I'm sure there are additional questions that may have arisen. We received the full PowerPoint presentation that Ms. Hampton presented at that meeting. We will have second reading and continuation of the public hearing and second reading on May the 6th. So tonight is just another additional opportunity for the council to ask questions, get clarification from our staff on anything related to the Blue Valley Power Plant discussion. I know I have a number of questions and clarifications, but I'll open it up to the council if there's anyone else who has anything to ask or comment on to our staff this evening. Yes.
I do have some comments, and I brought my my personal copy of the Energy Master Plan from Burns and Mac. This is only a portion of it. It's a very lengthy document, but in their section of it on conclusions, and recommendations. I wanted to just point out 5 of those that I think are very important for the council to consider in our deliberations and our discussions before we actually vote on this at the May 6th or later council meeting. So these are taken directly, and I think it's important because they are the experts that have studied the whole issue of the Blue Valley Power Plant, and that's one of the big decisions before this council. So if I can, Mayor, if it's okay, I'm just going to go through these 5 conclusions from the Burns and McDonald Energy Master Plan study. So number 1, their recommendation was that IPL should close the Blue Valley units as soon as practicable, which we're already on record. I believe Councilmember Huff is the one that moved that resolution or that recommendation, and we passed that some time back. Number 2, continue to maintain the combustion turbines. That's really not part of the closing decision that's before us, but I think it is part of the decision that we will be making as we find the capacity to close Blue Valley. Number 3, focus on low-cost capacity, not necessarily energy resources. So I think that's an important consideration because that's part of this discussion and part of the tables and the options that we were given. I'll read that once more. Focus on low-cost capacity, not necessarily on energy resources. Number 4, capital expenditures today may limit future opportunities. So the capital expenditures we make for capacity in order to close Blue Valley will potentially limit some of our future choices and the choices for future city councils. And number 5, the short-term and mid-term capacity contracts rather than actual assets are desirable. So to me, that means the short-term or mid-term capacity contracts are the ones that will leave our options open for this council and future councils to consider. Because capacity is going to be changing. The ways capacity can be calculated, the way that we can have capacity possibly. We talked about battery backups and other options in the future. So with those recommendations from the master plan, and in looking at some of the options that we were given in those tables, it seems to me that even though the Oneida 20-year contract is a fairly inexpensive contract over the long term, it does keep us from having those options in the near future, in the mid and near future. And so my desire would be more along the lines of a 5-year contract with maybe an option for 5 more. And during those 5 years, things are going to be changing. And if we needed to extend it, we would have the option for another 5 years with a cheaper contract with Oneida as well. So I think my desire would be to stick with a shorter term contract than the 20 years, which would tie our hands or tie the hands of probably future councils like we have done in the past. Some of the councils have done in the past. So it gives us the opportunity to use the wisdom from the Energy Master Plan, but also look at the opportunities that are before us that have been presented to us. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay. I guess I'll start. And Mr. City Manager, some of these are probably going to be best answered by Ms. Hampton. Some may be more finance questions. So you tell whoever to come up here and answer them. The first, I do want to talk about, as Councilman Robertson said, close as soon as practical. I believe, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but the recommendation was 3 to 5 years. I mean sooner if practical, but I believe the report that we received said that within 3 to 5 years, we are definitely going to have to replace this capacity.
Well, I know it said that it was within 5 years of the end of life, I think, end of the economic life.
Okay.
I can't speak in detail if there was more other than that piece of it.
So when we say as soon as practical, I know there's been a recommendation to do that by 2020, but has that, I mean, that's fairly subjective. As what is as soon as practical, what does as soon as practical mean?
So from my point of view, I think that, first of all, you don't want to, you know, rush into it to the point that you end up causing yourself problems, either economic issues or, you know, that we haven't thought through all the transition issues prior to closing Blue Valley. So I think we need to be very deliberate about it. And, you know, our timeline that we put together, I think, is reasonable as far as June of 2020. I think that I would not suggest anything prior to that. That would be really, you know, I think we would be rushing through that, and we don't want to make mistakes. You know, the issue with Blue Valley is it has been a good power plant for the city. I think the employees that work there have been good employees for the city. Unfortunately, it can't compete with the new technologies. And so the issue is, you know, deciding kind of when do we shut that down? What do we use for replacement capacity, which is required? But also understanding that it is a very expensive operation, and so that is part of IPL's consideration as we look at rates, is the longer we operate that plant at the higher cost, the more that reduces our ability to make adjustments on the rate side. So it's a balancing act, and you know, you folks have a lot of information to consider and to make those decisions on timing.
Okay. Projected capacity requirements. I think this is something that, in my conversations with some people in the community, is difficult to understand in terms of we're projecting out for till 2039 based on the assumption that our capacity requirements are going to continue to increase at the same rate as they have historically. And I think people are having a hard time really reconciling that with the technologies that are coming on board, the changes in energy, the renewables, sustainability, efficiencies. So how, I mean, can you just, I know you went into this in some detail. It was a question that was asked at the study session, but maybe, you know, explain once again, you know, how these numbers are being projected other than just based on historically this is what they have been.
Yeah, so first of all, historically over the last few years it's been 0.5 instead of 0.35, so we've actually, the growth rate we put in there is a little less than what we've seen in the more recent past. But we have to make some kind of an assumption initially. And so, you know, based on what we have seen, and most of that is historical, this is what we're anticipating. If the economic development program that was presented tonight really takes off, it's possible we have way underestimated that growth. If we have a recession, it's possible that we have overestimated that growth. Or if we come across some really great energy efficiency improvements over time, that could happen too. One of the advantages of Onetta, and one of the reasons why we feel like it is a very promising option, is because it does allow flexibility in how much capacity we actually take from them.
So this growth is based on customer growth, not existing customer usage.
Right, correct. Okay. This is a load growth based primarily on customer growth rather than the growth in what they're using at their facilities. Now if you look at electric cars, if that really takes off, that's another area that you could be seeing increase in load. But we are going to look for energy efficiency options too to try to keep that down a little bit.
Madam Mayor, may I interject?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about growth, specifically, we're really talking about industrial growth
That would be nice.
Yes, and that's kind of where I'm going. Specifically, we would like to have industrial growth, commercial growth, but heavy industrial use that can really crank up the amps and get that in here. That's something that we do not have. I mean, the ratepayers are the residents are subsidizing, if you will, or they are the bulk payment.
The residents are about 50% of the revenues on the, as far as our customer revenues, and you'll see some of that in the analysis that's coming up. We are heavy residential compared to a lot of areas, and certainly having industrial loads would be beneficial, I think, for the city, for the folks in the city, and for IPL.
So that would be the big game changers would be the industrial growth.
Yes.
Growth. Yeah.
I knew what you were saying.
Thanks.
Okay, at the study session presentation, we spent really most of the time evaluating Dogwood and Oneida. I think Dogwood is pretty straightforward in terms of we know exactly what that looks like from the experience that we currently have with them. So I don't think that takes a lot of explanation about why that would be potentially an option, although there's some higher expense associated with it. Oneida, 20 years does certainly seem like a long time.
Sure.
But I just want to make sure that we understand this correctly, that there is an option for a 10, 15, or 20-year agreement, but the price would be locked in for what we negotiate for 20 years, but we would have options during that 20-year period to continue with them or to break that agreement and go in another direction. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
So basically, we select. You select. If you want to select a 10-year or a 15-year or a 20-year, that's what we write the contract for. And so each of those different prices are based on the length of the contract.
But then we're committed for that length of time?
And then we're committed for that time, but we don't have to take the entire amount that's in that chart. We can take, we would start at 45.
Right.
And then there are provisions within there on going up in megawatts if we need additional capacity. We cannot go backwards, though. That's the
Gotcha.
only thing. If we go up to 50, then we can't go back down to 45.
So there is not a 5-year option with Oneida? It's a 10, 15, or 20?
I don't believe that they offered a 5-year option.
Okay.
And just to be, a little bit clearer on the options that we have, one of the things we talked about is capacity is more than likely going to be increasing in price over the next 5 years, because as we start to see all these plants shut down, capacity gets more and more expensive. So as coal plants shut down, as nuclear plants shut down, as old gas plants shut down, it's more than likely going to get more expensive. And so, and that coupled with the fact that we didn't feel like this council was necessarily hungry for building new generation right now, you may decide in 5 years that it's time to build new generation, but it still takes a while to put that deal together.
I believe I asked for the numbers for a plant to be built, and I never have seen anything, so it's real tough for me to make a decision here.
Well, I think we gave you some information as far as what it would take, and it's part of that master plan. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I know that I did also, you got
Do
it?
you have that, Mark?
All right.
Because my
I think they've answered
just
so many.
reeling.
They've answered so many questions. It's
Yeah.
difficult to remember everything. So, in the master plan, they did do some evaluations on building new plants or replacing Blue Valley with something. And somebody asked about rebuilding Blue Valley, which I think is not the right question. I think that you would never.
I asked to build a new plant.
Right. So
we have plenty of
replacing
ground out there, and I was asking, and I've asked that 2 or 3 times now, and I'm not really getting the information I'm asking for. I asked how much it costs to build a new plant, not rebuild, build a new.
Okay. So that information was in the master plan. We pulled that out. Replacing Blue Valley with reciprocating engines equal to 108 megawatts in size, has an estimated capital cost of approximately $138 million based on the 2018 master plan. This does not include debt service or O&M and does not evaluate staffing needs. This option was not cost competitive with any of the other options that were offered, and that's the reason why it was not brought forward in the master plan. So that's the information that we have for you there.
That isn't what I asked you for, though. I see the master plan, but that's not what I asked. You're giving me all these numbers, but I'm not getting everything that I'm asking for.
Well, maybe I'm not clear.
Well, my concern about this is just like you said, all these places are closing down. No one's asking for permits to build new. One of these days, it's going to be an eye-opener. I mentioned the 3 to 5 year the very first time. That was weeks ago, that I think that's our best go, because technology is changing. I understand we're rolling the dice there a little bit, but at least we can expand out there. I'm just wondering, you just keep talking about staff. I hope on this negotiations that you actually are hiring some utility lawyers and you're not doing it with staff.
We do have lawyers working with us.
And one other thing, the dogwood thing that everybody keeps eluding, we also have energy there. Besides the capacity, there is energy. And I think everybody's overlooking that. There is something there. You can hedge against that cost that you're talking about going up. You can hedge that against that.
So a couple things about that. Number one, you're kind of on both ends of the spectrum, whether you want a 5-year plan or if you want a end-of-plant life plan that Dogwood would provide. So that's two very different strategies that you can certainly think about and talk about and discuss and decide what direction you want to go. Potentially, we don't know when the end of life will be for the Dogwood plant. It could last a long time, it could be short, but when I think about it, I'm thinking it's much longer than the 5 years that we're talking about investing. So if you're talking about, do we want to invest in a short term, like Scott had suggested, Mr. Roberson has suggested, do we want to invest in, the longer 10, 15, 20-year capacity or capacity and energy, which Onetta also offers, or do we want to go life of plant for Dogwood? So there's a lot of decision making that the council gets to consider.
I don't believe we're getting enough facts here to make them decisions.
Well,
they're pretty vague.
Madam Mayor?
There's a lot of information here for sure.
Yeah, Madam Mayor. This facility has served us well. Any structure or any master plan has always been that we have to close it. If that's not the foundation that we build our conversation on, then we got to start all over. So we have to proceed to get something to cover us for that closing, which is our goal, because it has done a wonderful job with wonderful people, that it's outgrown its technology and it has become a burden to us. If I read the things right, it's $5 million alone in salaries. I've looked at this, and you can spend these numbers that the plant cost us anywhere from $5 to $37 million, depending on how you look at it. But if we don't come together and say that that is our goal, then we're fighting each other for no reason here. Because of the unanswered questions of transmission and additional cost, I feel that we got to go ahead on something. I personally like Dogwood. I like the energy. I like the no risk factors, and I could sit up here and But if it is that we go the other way, let's get started, because it could be too expensive to bring here. It could dice the whole program, and we can't get that information as we had asked before. So if we could come together to say, this is our goal, and this goal is to reduce the rates, to give it back to the people. And if one of these, or a combination of these two, is the answer. But there's a window of opportunity here with the SPP. And here again, educating the public. We get all our energy from SPP. That's where it is. All our contracts go into that pool. It's to cover us for our contract with them. This is just another contract to cover. How it's covered is one thing. Why it's going to be covered is the first thing. So I think there's got to be a lot more discussion. I'm not there, but we have to move, or this window is going to be another year away from what we decide on. So we're going to have to get together and hash this out.
So I agree with you, Councilman. We have to formulate a plan, move forward. We can't just say, we'll deal with that later. I mean, we have to deal with it soon. I mean, very soon. To kind of wrap up what I started. So we know a lot about dogwood from experience. We spent a lot of time looking at Oneida and the options, but there is not a 5-year option at Oneida. Or they didn't present us with one. That doesn't mean that we couldn't ask for that, but there wasn't one presented to us. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about the other options, and specifically, after hearing your presentation, looking through, reading it over again, I wanted to ask more about the option for Lincoln Electric, which is offering us 46 megawatts, which is sufficient for what we need for 2020, for 1 year. And I know that it was the lowest short-term average annual cost. The negatives regarding Lincoln were that it didn't provide a long-term solution. I'm going to get into a whole lot more questions here, but I just kind of want to keep that in mind, that because there is a need to make a decision soon, we may not be in a position to make a 20-year decision right now. So, I'm interested in keeping this Lincoln Electric option, in the discussion for the time being, if necessary, as we move forward and answer some more of these questions. To me, it seems like it may be, and certainly I didn't memorize that book. I didn't, one of a few books. But I think that one sort of got dismissed rather quickly, and I think, it's something that maybe we ought to kind of keep in mind as we make this decision, so that we can keep moving forward as we work through all these complex questions.
The same questions apply to Lincoln as they do to Oneida. And once you have what they would say from the SPP about how it gets here, it seems to me that we have a contract. We got one with Dogwood, and it has the lines here. And we had a previous contract, and we should have some kind of numbers that we could reasonably assume something from or project. But having said that, we still got to go through SPP. Mm-hmm. So whatever applies to Oneida also applies to Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And we got to put it in the process, but we have to hammer out what it is.
But they've offered us a 1-year option, and the others have not.
Right, and if we go with Lincoln, for instance, then there's a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, we would still, as you suggested, have to put that into the SPP study. They would come back with the amount it would cost, if anything, to upgrade those lines to cover the deliverability issue. And then that would be the option that we would select, but that would last for 1 year. But we wouldn't want to go down the path of Lincoln Electric unless we've made a decision about Blue Valley, because you don't need Lincoln Electric if Blue Valley is still operating. So I think what Mr. Van Camp had suggested about, making a decision about that. When are you going to shut down Blue Valley? Are you going to shut down Blue Valley? If so, then you've got some options to look at, like you've all suggested.
But we could do Lincoln for 1 year cheaper than we can keep running Blue Valley. and
Yeah,
not close it
another
down,
option that we did look
correct?
at is actually combining Lincoln for 1 year and Onetta for the remaining length. But if you're not ready to make a commitment of any kind to Onetta, then basically you're saying we would do Lincoln for a year, but then we would have to go back out with an RFP for whatever period. We would have to do this again for after that first year, unless we had talked with Onetta about whether they would be willing to start theirs in 2021, but we'd still have to have a contract with them and have made that decision.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
So my understanding too, if we use Onetta or Lincoln, it's going to take till October, November, till Southwest Power Pool does their study before we know what the transmission
Dogwood.
costs. Pardon?
Or Dogwood.
Or Dogwood.
Any of them.
What the transmission costs are going to be for any of them.
Correct.
And so we can't make a decision on closing Blue Valley until we know what those transmission costs are, and then make a final decision
Correct.
on a contract, whether it's 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, whatever it's going to be for that capacity. Just to go back for a minute, I don't think there's been any new power plants built in the last 10 to 20 years. And so that whole process through the Department of Energy takes decades to get through. And I think any talk about building a new power plant to try to close Blue Valley means that we're putting it off for 10 years or 15 years, and it may not happen then. So I think that is a fool's errand to ask you to go and ask about building a new power plant, because nobody in the United States has built one in the last 10 to 20 years that I know of. Maybe you have new information on that.
I would have to look at that, but I would agree with this idea that if we were going to build it, it will take a while to get all the permits, everything approved, get the design in place, get the contracts in place, and have it built. But I'm not opposed to looking at that if that's what we need to do. Whatever you guys decide is fine with me.
Okay. Those were my questions from the presentation. My other questions are from the IPL responses to council questions. The first one was, I think we've covered, is the total cost associated with each option. So I'm not going to go into that. The personnel implications and transition plan. And I know this is a brief answer to probably a very complicated question, but the plan would result in reduction of 16 full-time employees from the current 39 full-time employees. So that's a pretty significant reduction. Some things we have not, and this predates you, but both with AMI and Blue Valley, I want to see what that transition plan actually looks like. I mean, actual positions and how those, what is filled, what is not filled, when those would transition out, and our plans for those employees. I mean, according to this, that we have about half of our personnel who, it says, have reached retirement age, parentheses, 55. Well, unlike our public safety officials, they don't get full retirement at 55. So I'm not convinced that all those people will or want to, or we want to retire at 55. I mean, the retirees from 55 to 65 are our most expensive retirees and our most experienced and longest tenured employees. So I think that is making, in my mind, maybe a false assumption about, well, these people are ready to go anyway. So I would like to see a more detailed analysis or, plan of how eventually these employees are going to be reduced, either by attrition or because we don't have them filled in these positions anyway. And we have not really received what I think is, a real clear explanation of that in particular. And we've already decided, we need to come up with some replacement for Blue Valley. Whatever that is. That is not what's being, disputed or debated. And how long is that going to take? And what positions are affected by that and when? I think that we need to really have a better understanding of that. The next question is, it says demolish Blue Valley. I don't really envision that is what we're going to do, is when we close, when and if Blue Valley is closed. It's going to be closed someday.
Right. I think that would be a council decision.
Right.
On whether we do that or not. That question was asked by a council member.
It was. And I don't see that cost calculated into sort of the big picture cost of what we're talking about. We're talking about the cost to replace capacity, potentially the cost to replace energy.
I don't think, we don't anticipate needing to demolish Blue
but
Valley.
There's still going to be a cost to closing down that plant.
There would be some transition costs that we've talked about. I think it's fairly minor, but also when you're talking about employee transition costs, which you kind of alluded to earlier, we do have somebody that we are engaging to talk through the options, but ultimately I could tell you all sorts of options that we're considering, but I can't tell you what that plan looks like yet, and it's definitely not going to. I can give you recommendations, but I certainly can't tell you what it's going to look like.
Here again, until we get the coverage to close, we don't know that we need our turbines. We don't know if we're required when we're not producing. When all of what we did was we had a capacity that had to be honored because of our contract. This will no longer be the case when we close it and we put it with something else. Our Southwest Power Pool responsibility is in question without answers at this point. We can't do one until we do the other. The people who are there because we're required to have that. We do not now, when we finally make a decision, when we get to the point, a problem with what it is because it talks for itself at that point. But we have to get some kind of response from SPP in order to proceed. One variable always leads to the other. You cannot, what I think I'm getting here is that we're going to close it. So why not do some prep work on doing that? But the answers are only if what we cover our contractual requirements with.
Okay. Did you? Yes,
Yeah, one
go
last
ahead.
question. So the Southwest Power Pool does their study in October, November. Do they just do it once a year?
They do it twice a year.
They do it twice a year. So when is the next time? In the spring?
December.
January and June.
Oh, in December. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Maybe is it January?
January and
I may
June.
have gotten that wrong. I was thinking it was December. but
January and June?
That's
it's twice
what-
a year.
Yeah, according to this.
So if we miss one, we've got to wait till the next one. So it puts off any decision on Blue Valley until the next study. And then we make the final decision. So it does put things off.
Okay. I'm not going to go through every single question, but But if they're available for anybody who'd like to see these, transmission cost and process for determining cost, which Councilman just referred to, is that it's performed 2 times a year starting in January and June. I mean, the answer to the question is, how much is it going to be? And we don't know.
Right. We put something in the contract that we are drafting with Onetta to allow us to get out of that contract if the cost is over $1 million.
Okay.
So
we don't, I mean, we could choose not to get out if it's still a good cost, but we put that in there as an escape clause to say if it's too much, that we will pull out.
Taking this to SPP does not require us to have a contract with them before we do it.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Go along with that same line of thinking with Dogwood, we already receive energy there from them. With the
Correct.
transmission upgrade, would that be a significant cost?
We don't know. We would have to put that in just like we would anything else that we would decide to go with, whether it's Lincoln or Onetta or Dogwood. Any of those we would have to put into the study, and they would come out with the cost. So as much as I'd like to be able to give you that cost, I can't, because it's really dependent on all the different folks that put in what they are wanting to do, and then they run the study for the entire SPP region.
Okay, well, that makes a little bit more sense then.
Well, granted, it could change, but there is a template here. We are receiving. We've made the contract. We have made the lines available. It's in there. And they could change their mind, but we have established. And there's no place else in the country that has a capacity-only coverage ever. What I mean is nobody else has ever done a contract that's similar to this and with SPP.
So you're evaluating a system that is extremely complicated, and you're evaluating with everybody else and what they want to do. And things change also as you put new, and you were talking about new generation, but when you talk about renewable generation, that has made a difference. The reason why, Dogwood has had a successful year, and I say successful, better than previous, part of the reason is because some of that generation has shifted the way the congestion works on the system. So
it
there's
just
all
leads
sorts
to
of
another
things
question.
that go into this.
Right. That just leads to another question.
Sure.
Are we profitable now on what we're getting? There are all kinds of these, but what I'm saying is until we, the preparational mode of this situation is that we're going to close Blue Valley. The people deserve to know that we're going to do that, especially the ones that are making their living out there. We have to make a decision on how to go forward. I just don't want to be trapped into a contract that says that we're gaining information that says we're required to take it.
So, if we went into a contract with any of them, again, Onetta, we have
You would have the out and the option.
I would, well, and I don't know if the others would agree to it, but, we could ask for it, right? We could ask for it.
If the transmission was $2 million
right.
an inch.
The question is, the question I'm struggling with is, yes, we can't continue to operate Blue Valley as it sits today for the cost and, age and so on and so forth. But it's a question of when and how soon do we need to do this, and can we do some alternative things to get us what we need to operate and maintain our reliability for our customers and all of those other things, stay in good standing with the SPP without committing to a 10 or 15 or 20-year plan. So that's why I'm looking at some of these other alternatives. A question that Councilman Perkins asked was providing a comparison on implementing AMI or not implementing AMI, and what that would do on future rates. And I know that the answer to that question is we'll have Burns and Mac take a look at that and run that through the machine and give us the answer, but we don't have that information, correct?
We should have that for the cost of service presentation.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question. In terms of our scheduled timeline, we are scheduled to have the second reading on May the 6th, and then we're supposed to have the study session on the cost of service study on the 13th. I mean, why would we do that? Why would we have
the AMI,
vote on
whether you go
this
AMI or don't go
before
AMI,
we have the cost of service study? That doesn't, to me, make sense that we don't seem to have all the information that might be relevant before we make this, very important decision.
Okay, so we can ask Burns and Mac to make sure that we have that information on that day. AMI or not AMI is going to change overall the financial, but it doesn't change the cost of Dogwood or the cost of Lincoln or the cost of Onetta.
Correct.
So that doesn't change. It's still, the delta is still there. We can give you that. I'll make sure that we have that information for you on that day. But it doesn't impact your delta between the different options. But we will have that for you, so you can have that information on the day of the next reading, which is next week?
2 weeks.
Next week?
We
2
have
weeks.
5 Mondays this
2
month,
weeks.
so we get a Monday off.
What would be the times, or do you have time to talk to these people about a 3 to 5 year? You're saying they didn't offer, maybe we didn't ask them.
I mean, we can ask them about a 3 to 5 year.
I was in agreement with that the whole time, with 3 to 5 years. I don't like to get past that, but I realize we're rolling the dice, but.
So, my calculators just go, kind of running and thinking, we know what we're already spending for Dogwood. We know what we are anticipating spending to replace the capacity. So that's 90 million. I mean, give or take. We don't know what the transmission is going to be, and I'm not asking you to give us a number, but that's an unknown, but it's going to be millions.
We don't know that. We don't know that it's going to be millions. And just to be clear, there are already lines that run from that plant to our area. It's not building new lines.
So
we're talking about looking and see if there are lines that are overloaded based on where they're at and what else everybody else wants to do. So those are the kinds of upgrades we're talking about. Now, we don't know what that number is going to be. We anticipate that it won't be millions of dollars.
So
I can't make a guarantee.
So I may have misspoken, because did you say that what you're negotiating with Onetta, it would not exceed $1 million?
I said if it was over $1 million, then we would have the option to cancel that contract.
Gotcha, okay. So I'm sorry.
You still have transmission cost involved.
But there's still transmission costs, correct?
That is the transmission cost.
That is the transmission?
I'm talking about the actual transmission.
We are not getting energy. We're not getting
gives it.
energy from them. This is a capacity-only contract. And so we're not getting energy from them because we don't need energy. We need the capacity to allow us to stay in the SPP market.
Right. Our generation projects that do that go into the pool. That's why we get all of there. We were required by our contract to cover that in one way or another. Until we cover that cost, we're not going anywhere. So it behooves us to get on with this to that point.
What do we currently owe Dogwood?
what we currently owe Dogwood.
Yes.
I don't know that I have that, well, I know I don't have that
Okay.
answer for you. I do know also that there were some additional questions that were posed today, and one of those was a question about Dogwood, but not about what we currently owe.
Mr. City Manager, do you know the answer to that question?
Oh, visit among yourself for a minute.
Okay, I'll ask another question while you look that up.
Madam Mayor, I think I'm pretty accurate. I believe the city paid $48.5 million for the 75 megawatts at 12.13% ownership. The Dogwood purchase was financed by bonds, which mature in 2037. That means we owe about $33 million,
Okay.
give or take a buck.
Okay. My point is, pretend that the number's 138 million. I mean, maybe it isn't, maybe. Blue Valley, I mean, one of the reasons why we moved ahead with Missouri City was so that we could control what our destiny on that plant. I mean, we don't know when somebody's going to come in and say, no, you've got, and tell us what we have to do with it. You know, aging power plant, you know, you just don't know what's going to happen with that. So I don't anticipate that we're going to demolish Blue Valley anytime soon, but if we had to, you know, we're over $138 million in total cost rather than, and you know, I don't want to open up a whole new discussion. The discussion's been had in this community about building our own. I mean, we could have built Iatan, we could have built Nebraska City. We didn't. We decided, you know, to do something else instead. So I don't want to throw that into the discussion right now, but I just don't feel comfortable that we really have a grip today on what this is really going to cost. So, you know, we have a few more weeks to get some more of these answers, and some of them we just aren't gonna know in terms of until we have an agreement in place and make a decision in which way we want to go. But I am very reluctant today, based on the information that we have, to enter into any kind of a long-term agreement. I would really like to consider our options for a 1-year or 3-year option. And, you know, this council will ultimately make that decision, but I think that would be very helpful to us. Yes?
Just wanted to add a couple things. The capacity that we're looking to buy, this is strictly a decision on saving money right now with the closing of Blue Valley. And so the longer we put off this decision to close Blue Valley and to buy capacity, the more it is going to affect rates. I mean, there's just no doubt that it has affected rates and will continue to affect our rates negatively until we close Blue Valley and move on with some sort of contract. So any of the contracts we're talking about actually are going to save IPL money in the long run because they are cheaper than the continuing operation and maintenance of Blue Valley since it's nearing the end of its lifespan. The transmission costs, even though those are a factor in our decision, may never be paid because it's capacity. So we're not saying we're going to buy that energy, and it's only going to be called on by SPP if we go over the amount of energy that we have in contracts now. So that capacity may or may not ever be called on, and only if it is called on will we have expenses for the transmission cost. The other thing that I just wanted to say about Blue Valley, because I think there's value in leaving it. Just like I said earlier, nobody has built a new power plant. We still hold a license for a power plant. which nobody in the nation can buy right now. So there's value in holding the license for a power plant in Independence, even though it's closed down, it's not used, because it's one of those pieces of paper from the Department of Energy that you can't get. So there's value in keeping Blue Valley shuttered, in my opinion, the way it is.
As long as we can.
Yeah.
Until somebody tells us we can't. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's a possibility. So, I mean, we've already done the ash pond, all that kind of stuff.
Right,
So,
those are monitored. Yeah.
One more question, Mr. City Manager. And I'm sorry, I know we've put a lot of energy into, so to speak, into this topic. Can you just, again, let us know, I mean, has our bond council had, do you think, sufficient time to evaluate this, and our finance department in terms of the overall impact on our financial standing?
I think a decision of this magnitude can always benefit from additional opportunities to research it in terms of bond counsel and finance weighing in on it. I've spoke with our director of finance and administration. They certainly wouldn't begrudge the opportunity to continue evaluating it. The curious thing about this decision is, as Ms. Hampton has said, you kind of have a chicken-egg situation here in terms of at least committing to a path, but having that opportunity to roll it back. But to be direct with your question, there's certainly always an opportunity to review more.
Are there questions that you, or assurances that you would like to have that you don't, that would benefit from a little bit more time? I mean, I know we have a deadline. I'm not trying to push this down the road. I know we need to, make a decision. But, I also don't want to be hasty in this decision. And Ms. Hampton, we're delighted to have you here, but you've not even been here 120 days, and there's a lot that goes into making these recommendations and these decisions.
Off the top of my mind right now, Madam Mayor, I don't know, other than the questions that we've notated here tonight. I can't think of other outstanding issues off the top of my mind, but certainly these are meritorious of us maximizing the time we do have in the next 2 weeks. And if they take additional time, it's a generational decision, pardon my pun, that requires a tremendous amount of thought before we commit to that path. So we'd want to certainly make sure we've got a comfort level among the council before we begin that journey down a path.
Okay. Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if you're finished.
That completes all of my questions.
Well, I would like to circle back around on one, since this is a generational discussion that we're having, that is going to be in the tens of millions of dollars over the lifetime of this. And Councilman Huff had mentioned, and we've discussed, that there's not new plants being built. Coal's going away. Natural gas seems to be the predominant fuel for production. And I'm being the devil's advocate. This doesn't say I'm one way or the other for sure, but what are the benefits if we lock into a 10 or 15, 20-year contract? Do those within that contract, does the fuel price, the natural gas price, is that locked in, or is that volatile towards the markets?
So it depends on what contract we're talking about, but if
In general.
if we're locked into the capacity contract, then all we're paying for capacity. We're not paying for anything else. It doesn't matter where fuel goes. It doesn't matter where O&M goes. They have the responsibility to provide the capacity that we are paying them for. And how they get it, and how much it costs them is irrelevant to us, because we're paying them a certain amount for that capacity.
So if we get locked in today for whatever energy capacity we're buying, and whatever agreements they have for their energy, for their gas to be shipped to them per cubic foot, doesn't make any difference to us. We're locked into whatever we sign today then.
Correct.
So we really need to look at as natural gas becomes more prevalent, then we really need to look at what the future is going to be like on that high demand energy there. So that has to take into account too with what we do. That's all I have.
Okay. Any other comments, questions on Blue Valley? Okay, we'll move on to city boards and commissions. Madam City Clerk?
Yeah, I'll be super quick.
Okay.
We have one item on the Boards and Commission report in front of you. It's in regard to the Sustainability Commission. Recommendation has been received to appoint Connie Maida to the commission, so looking for direction.
There is a recommendation to appoint Connie Maida. If there's no objection, we will add that to the next regular council meeting. Hearing none, go ahead and add that.
And second on my list is about council committees. These are committees that are fully staffed by council members. We don't have to discuss it in length tonight if we don't want to, but it's something to think about, and we have some time before these terms expire. So they're on the back of my report. It's the Employee Advisory Committee, Transportation Policy Committee, and the one of the two representatives on the Economic Development Council.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, anything else this evening, Mr. City Manager?
No, I think that about covers
other
it.
topics, Councilman Perkins, I know you had one thing.
Yes,
Sorry,
thank you.
almost, you were that close, almost a clean getaway.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just so we can be here just a tad bit longer, I do want to recognize a couple volunteer groups that went out over the weekend and did some work in our community. Since today is Earth Day, I think it'd be definitely worth recognizing. Grant Newhart did an Eagle Scout project, Troop 201, Maywood Baptist Church. They planted 200 native tree seedlings by Spring Branch Creek in the Little Blue watershed. The trees were provided by Missouri Department of Conservation. They picked up trash along the Little Blue Parkway. Had a young lady, Angela, didn't get her last name. She'd only lived here for Independence for just a few months. Saw a need and decided to step in, and she started picking up trash around the Truman Depot, Liberty Street area, Bingham Wagner area, which leads me into my next segue. So thank you to them for stepping up and helping out with our community. Leads us to our citywide cleanup that the chamber members and volunteers are putting together. The date is set for Saturday, June 1st. We're still working on a little bit more specific details, but the date of Saturday, June 1st is the date of our next third annual citywide cleanup. More details to come. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other topics tonight? Okay, we are adjourned.